Bullets whizzed past him, and the heat from the burning oil below scorched his skin. He heard the dying gasps and falls of his brothers in arms, each sound marking the death of a comrade. It was over. They were trapped, hanging helplessly on the cliff. They couldn't return fire. Their muskets were strapped to their backs. Retreat was impossible. The descent was too steep, and they were too exhausted. Poke's arm, once healed by royal medicine, now throbbed with agonizing, tearing pain. Sweat and ice water soaked his clothes, freezing in the night wind. He knew he couldn't hold on much longer. His strength was fading with every heartbeat. He was going to die here, on the back of Conford Mountain, in a nameless, pathetic end. The mission for Harold had failed, and his men were lost, but amidst the despair, a surge of raw, burning fury ignited within him. Poke, a warrior saved by Harold, refused to die like a rat in a crevice. He locked eyes on a Conford militia member above, who was tossing a Molotov cocktail. Now, with a low growl, Poke gripped the rock with his left hand and drew his hand axe with his right. This axe, seasoned by countless battles, would strike one last time. Relying on instinct, he poured his remaining strength into his arm, his scars pulsing with heat. With a roar, Poke hurled the axe at the target. As the axe spun into the firelight, Poke's strength vanished. His fingers slipped, and he lost his grip on the cliff. His final sight was the axe vanishing into the chaos above and the silhouette of Carnford Castle. The sounds of battle faded as weightlessness took him. Cold wind rushed past as the rocks and firelight receded. With no fear, only emptiness, he screamed his final cry to the north, "Your Majesty." The scream ended abruptly with a heavy thud hundreds of meters below. Above, the Carnford garrison continued to clear the area. The axe embedded itself into a wooden barricade, vibrating, a final testament to its owner's defiance. By dawn, the gunfire had ceased, leaving only the scent of smoke and blood. I stood at the cliff's edge, imagining the carnage below. Torches illuminated bullet marks, scorch marks, and dark bloodstains. A soldier retrieved the bloodstained axe and presented it to me. It looked grim and silent. I was shaken. Harold's cliff assault had exceeded my expectations. Most had deemed the cliff impassable, focusing defenses on the front, leaving only a token militia force behind. Had the militia captains not brought their dogs, the night could have ended in disaster. The dogs' keen sense of smell had served as the only reliable alarm. The pale, sweating militia captains stood by, terrified. My silent pressure was more agonizing than a reprimand. Punish the negligent, reward the vigilant, I ordered. The captains felt relieved. They knew the Lord was fair. They knelt, promising future vigilance. I left for the main castle. Inside, Charlotte stood in her nightgown, disheveled and tense. She clutched baby Klein, who was crying, while holding a rapier. Lady Isabella and the staff were panicked, but Charlotte stood firm, shielding her family. "Carl, are the Solonians attacking?" she asked, her hand steady on the sword. I calmed her, explaining that a small Solonian raiding party had been wiped out. I spoke gently to avoid further frightening Klein. "You cannot stay here," I insisted. "The castle is no longer safe. You must relocate." "Where?" Lady Isabella asked, her voice trembling. "The bank headquarters in the new city. It's the most secure location with reinforced vaults." Charlotte looked at her son, then nodded. "Agreed. We'll pack immediately." They moved that night. They arrived at the bank, settling into the secure, hidden underground suites. Once settled, Charlotte fed Klein, who eventually fell into an exhausted sleep. I stood by the bed, watching my son's innocent face. The boy's cries had pierced my heart. I had nearly failed them. Charlotte turned to me. She noticed my coat buttons were misaligned from the chaos. She silently rebuttoned my coat, her touch gentle and familiar. "It's done," she said. "Don't worry about us. The castle is strong, and I can defend myself. But you..." She looked at me with concern. "You are the Lord. You must be careful. We need you alive." Her simple words warmed my heart. I looked at her tired but resolute face, feeling my tension dissolve. Being needed and cared for was a powerful comfort. "I will. Thank you," I replied. Charlotte hugged me, and I held her back, a rare moment of intimacy. "Go rest," she whispered. "We are safe here." I nodded, promising to increase security before leaving. As I returned to the command post, my fear transformed into a cold, deep resolve for vengeance. Roland's mind raced with images of his terrified son, Charlotte guarding with her sword, and his mother-in-law's forced composure. If Harold wants a night raid, he will have one too. Meanwhile, the Solon command tent was heavy with tension, the only sound the crackling of giant tallow candles. Harold sat on his throne, face dark, a lone survivor of the failed raid, leg broken and crudely splinted, knelt before him, covered in blood and filth. Your Majesty, I am incompetent. All 100 brothers are lost. Please punish me. The soldier sobbed, trembling with shame and fear. Harold tapped his fingers rhythmically against the throne's armrest, silent. Finally, he spoke, his voice cold. You say there were dogs on the mountain? Yes, Your Majesty, the soldier stammered. We were 20 steps from the summit when they barked. They threw torches and Molotov cocktails, exposing us to their volley fire. My brothers. He choked back tears. The tent fell into a deathly silence. High-ranking generals like Asgir, Ulf, Sven, and Luoyao stood on either side, their expressions grim. A meticulously planned decapitation strike defeated by barking dogs? It was a humiliating slap to Solon's pride. They were used to fighting steel and gunpowder, not guard dogs. Harold closed his eyes, exhaling deeply. He was angry, but more than that, he was weary and forced to face reality. These elite climbers were irreplaceable. The path of stealth was now sealed by fire and canine warnings. Harold opened his eyes, his gaze sharp. Enough. If the raid fails, there is only one path left, an all-out assault. Order the army. At dawn, we attack across the entire line. 30,000 men in the first wave. Luoyao. I am here. Luoyao stepped forward. Your musketeer guard will support the infantry, suppressing their cannons and musketeers on the earthen walls. Yes. Asgir Sven. Present. The two generals responded. You will each lead 15,000 elites to attack the center and left. The rest will strike the right and contain the mountain fortresses. Harold declared. Conford's earthen walls are only 5 meters high. The trenches are only 5 meters wide. What are these to Solon's warriors? He urged his commanders. Bring thick wooden planks to bridge the trenches. Use shortened ladders for speed. We have the numbers. If we swarm them from all sides, their muskets and cannons cannot cover every point. Once one section breaks, the rest will follow. Without their outer barrier, the main city will fall. Tomorrow, I want the Solon flag atop those walls. Let us bury my ambition and show the Plantagenets the power of Solon's iron hooves. For the Emperor. For Solon. Sven shouted, his fighting spirit reignited. The other generals echoed the cry, caught in the fervor. Ulf, though wary of the heavy cost, bowed his head in obedience. For the next 2 days, the air outside Conford felt heavy as lead. The Solon camp echoed with the rhythmic thud of wood chopping. Thousands of slaves were driven to clear the forests, turning timber into thick planks in makeshift workshops. Others dug frozen earth to fill tens of thousands of sandbags. The camp was a haze of smoke and frantic, fearful energy. Conford scouts reported every move to the command center. On the general staff's sand table, red arrows marking Solon's forces converged on every weak point of the defense. It was clear. Harold had lost patience and intended to crush Conford with a wave of blood and steel. Harold was finally playing his hand, and I was ready. It was time to test my months of defensive preparation. I deployed 5,000 elite mercenaries from Frankfurt to the second line of defense. 10,000 infantry from France City, led by Laurent, gathered in the rear left, while 3,000 Northern Iron Cavalry under Kalin waited in a hidden valley. Conford's war machine hummed. Civilians assisted with logistics, medical care, and patrols. Werner's sailors dismantled heavy ship cannons, hauling them to key points on the second earthen wall, where their superior range would prove decisive. Engineers and auxiliary soldiers worked tirelessly, planting landmines, tripwires, and anti-infantry trenches. Conford had become a fortress factory, a labyrinth of traps awaiting the slaughter. 2 days later, before dawn, the sky remained ink-black. A low, longhorn blast echoed from the Solon camp. Torches and bonfires ignited, illuminating the horizon and the masses of moving shadows. the final assault had begun. Over 60,000 Solon troops, including servants and slaves, prepared for the charge. The sound of clashing pots, whips, shouts, and beasts rolled toward the Conford line like a rising tide. Conford's watchtowers immediately signaled the alarm. Sharp, relaying horn blasts pierced the night across the defensive line. The defense came alive. Auxiliary soldiers prepared hot meals for the troops as the tension of impending battle thickened the air. I arrived at the main command post, joined by Brendan, Roland, and Leon, as we watched the Solon tide through telescopes. Without pleasantries, I pointed to the sand table. The line is split into 3. I command the center, with the 3rd Regiment as the final reserve. Brendan, you hold the left mountain and bastion. You have the 2nd Regiment, 2 militia groups, and the Hessian mercenaries. The mountain is a natural barrier, but a critical weak point. Do not let it fall. Understood, my lord. As long as I breathe, the left flank stands. Brendan vowed. Roland, you hold the center earthen wall with the 1st Regiment, 2 militia groups, and a mercenary unit. Use the fortifications to bleed them dry. You may launch limited counterattacks, but do not overextend. Understood. I'll make the Solon dogs pay in blood. Roland declared. Leon, you guard the right flank and Amber Bay with 2 militia groups and your dragoons, supported by naval artillery. Keep the supply line secure, and keep your dragoons ready for my signal. Yes, my lord, Leon replied. I pointed to the final markers. Lawrence's 10,000 infantry and Kalen's 3,000 Northern Iron Cavalry will serve as the general reserve, ready to strike or plug any gaps at my command. The generals quickly digested their orders, exchanging nods over the sand table. They knew this battle would decide the fate of Conford and the entire northern frontier. There was no retreat. Only a fight to the death remained. Gentlemen, I said solemnly, this battle is unprecedented. I grant you full authority over your sectors. Act on your own judgment as the situation demands. I only require one result. Hold the line and cripple the enemy. This absolute trust stirred a profound sense of responsibility and fervor in Brendan and the others. For Conford, for the Lord, they roared, saluting with hands over their hearts. For Conford, I replied, my gaze resolute. To your posts. Exchanging encouraging glances, they departed the ramparts for their respective sectors. Only I and a few staff officers remained on the wall. I stood at the crenellations, watching the Solon army stir like a waking beast, and inhaled the cold, gunpowder-scented air. I had prepared everything, like a master chess player who had calculated every possible move. I accepted whatever outcome awaited me. Victory meant crushing Harold, turning the land into a symphony of blood and agony. I would then pursue the remnants, driving the invaders out of the northern frontier entirely. I would be crowned king of the north, marching south to claim the throne and forge a new dynasty. Yet, the shadow of defeat loomed just as heavily. Defeat meant watching Harold's cavalry breach the lines and flood Conford with tens of thousands of Solonians. Everything I built, the fortress, the town, the hope of my people, would be reduced to ash. Thousands would perish or be enslaved, and I might die alongside Charlotte and Klein, leaving the Solonians stronger than ever. I turned east, where the horizon glowed with the first light of dawn. The dim light was soon eclipsed by the flickering orange flashes of cannon fire. The Solonians had deployed over 100 cannons through night-dug trenches, positioning them just 50 paces from the outer earth wall. It was a suicidal, point-blank range. Fire! 100 cannons roared in unison, the earth trembling as solid shot whistled toward the wall. Boom! The wall shuddered under the impact, sending clouds of frozen earth, debris, and smoke into the air. The ramparts were battered, sandbags were tossed aside, and wooden defenses were shattered. Conford's silence was brief. Before the smoke cleared, the bastions erupted with retaliatory fire. Counter-battery fire. Rapid fire. Conford's fire was less dense, but far more precise. Minion cannons, falconets, and long-barreled naval guns roared from the bastions. Gunners targeted the exposed Solon positions with practiced accuracy. Boom! A 6-pounder shell struck a Solon copper cannon mid-barrel. The cannon shattered, spraying shrapnel that tore the crew and nearby slaves to pieces. Bang! A 12-pounder from the mountain castle struck another Solon gun, burying it and its crew in a smoking crater. Conford's artillery focused on sniping high-threat guns rather than engaging in a war of attrition. They fired rhythmically, striking when the enemy was reloading or adjusting. Though less intense, the psychological and physical damage was devastating. The Solon bombardment ceased, replaced by the shrill blast of attack horns. For the Emperor, for Solon, charge! A tide of desperate, ragged slaves surged from the trenches, driven forward by whips and blades. Carrying wooden planks and makeshift ladders, they charged the smoke-shrouded wall. Behind them, Solon infantry advanced steadily, stepping over the mud and the bodies of their own. Conford's response was cold and efficient. 12-pounder elephant cannons fired, targeting the dense Solon infantry formations rather than the slaves. Boom! The solid shot tore through the ranks, turning soldiers into gore and carving bloody paths through the frozen ground. Screams of agony filled the battlefield. All batteries. Canister shot. Fire. Every gun on the wall lowered its angle toward the death zone filled with slaves. They loaded iron pellets and explosive shells. Bang! A storm of iron swept across the charging slaves. The front lines collapsed instantly, shredded by the hail of metal and explosive blasts. Yet, the Solonians remained numb to the slaughter. Driven by their own execution squads, the slaves stepped over their fallen comrades, pushing toward the anti-cavalry trench filled with caltrops. Solon officers screamed for slaves to lay planks, while archers threatened any who hesitated or retreated. Conford musketeers, arranged in 3 ranks, emerged from behind the breastwork within the anti-cavalry trench to fire in rotation. The crisp volleys of flintlock muskets created a wall of white smoke. At this range, every lead ball found its mark. Slaves laying planks were mowed down like wheat, falling into the trench or onto the wood, their blood soaking the earth. Driven by the threat of death, others rushed forward, using the corpses of their predecessors to secure the blood-stained planks. Cannons on the walls and bastions fired steadily, targeting the newly laid bridges and the tunnel exits where Solon soldiers poured out. Each blast destroyed a crossing or annihilated a group of Solon soldiers. Despite horrific casualties, the Solonians managed to bridge the trench with thick planks, creating several precarious paths. Solon infantry charged across the planks with savage war cries. The paths were narrow, slippery with blood, and allowed only a few men to pass at once. Defenders' muskets continued to fire, knocking attackers into the trench below, where they were impaled on sharpened wooden stakes. The wounded struggled in agony on the stakes, crushed by falling comrades until they bled out or died in despair. Woo! 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 3 long-horn blasts signaled a massive volley of light arrows that darkened the sky, raining down on the Conford earth walls with a terrifying hiss. Shields up. Take cover. Defenders ducked behind anti-arrow boards or raised their shields. Arrows pelted the walls, sandbags, and water-soaked quilts, sounding like a downpour. While the volley caused limited casualties, it suppressed the defenders' fire, buying the Solon infantry precious seconds. Solon soldiers surged across the planks into the mine and caltrop-filled death zone near the earth walls. I observed every detail of the battlefield through my monocular. Staff and messengers relayed orders via concise commands or notes tied to arrows. The elephant cannons roared, scattering a regrouping Solon formation. I intended to show Harold the true extent of my firepower. At close range, the minion cannons, falconets, and naval guns operated by veteran sailors were devastatingly accurate. Solon formations were torn apart by explosions of flesh and metal fragments. Landmines detonated, shredding slaves and soldiers attempting to clear obstacles. Yet, the Solon forces seemed endless. As one wave fell, another was driven from the tunnels to march over the carnage. Human life had become the cheapest commodity. Through sheer numbers, more Solonians breached the minefield and reached the foot of the earth walls. The 5-meter-high walls loomed over them, with firing ports staring down like the eyes of a monster. Aim. Fire at will. The musketeers unleashed a lethal barrage. At point-blank range, lead balls easily pierced the soldiers' leather and padded armor. The volleys acted like a scythe. Throw. Defenders hurled lit satchel charges, Molotov cocktails, logs, and stones at the dense crowds below. Explosions tore through the ranks, scattering limbs and bodies. Molotov cocktails turned victims into screaming human torches, while logs and stones crushed those attempting to climb. Thomas, clutching a scavenged shield and a notched saber, followed the surging Solon soldiers toward the wall. He stepped on a caltrop but pulled it out, relieved it wasn't a landmine. A soldier ahead tried to lean a ladder against the wall, but a hidden satchel charge detonated beneath him. Boom! The blast vaporized the soldier and his companions, filling the air with the stench of charred flesh. Thomas was thrown back, ears ringing, vision blurred by dust and light. The relentless horn blasts drowned out the screams and explosions. Driven by the execution squads behind them, wave after wave of Solon soldiers trampled their own dead to push forward. After triggering more landmines, Thomas's unit reached the final defensive trench at the base of the wall. This trench was deeper and narrower, the defenders' last close combat barrier. Soldiers who jumped in were impaled on stakes and caltrops, screaming in agony. "Bridget, move!" a leader shouted, while defenders above continued to rain fire and explosives. Thomas laid a plank across the trench, shielding his head while hacking away with his saber. Ambition had vanished, replaced by a singular, desperate instinct: survive. Solon soldiers scrambled up short ladders, knives in their teeth and shields held high. Above, the defenders' muskets fired incessantly from the bastions. Lead balls fell like hail, causing climbers to tumble and knock others off the ladders. Defenders dropped more Molotov cocktails and satchel charges. The fire and explosions cleared the ladders, leaving only charred remains and the thick, bloody scent of death. Amidst smoke and flashes, Solon soldiers repeatedly raised ladders, only to have them toppled, then hoisted again by their frenzied comrades. Urged by officers, the Solon musketeer guard advanced to provide blind suppressive fire. Though inaccurate, the stray shots distracted the defenders, granting the climbers a brief, vital respite. Finally, at a staggering cost, the first wave of elite Solon soldiers roared as they crested the earthen wall. They were met not by victory, but by a forest of spears. Carnford infantry stood in tight formation, thrusting their weapons with mechanical, lethal efficiency. The Solonians were impaled before they could draw their sabers, their bodies thrown back to crush those climbing behind them. Yet, driven by survival, greed for rewards, and fear of their own execution squad, waves of Solon soldiers continued to swarm forward like moths to a flame. The trench at the wall's base became a bottleneck, packed with soldiers desperately pushing for a ladder or waiting for a breach. Thomas, caught in the crush, felt his heart pounding against his ribs. Hiding in a crater littered with corpses, he gripped his notched saber, watching the slaughter unfold with growing terror. A veteran's instinct warned him. Carnford's defenses were not limited to simple caltrops. They were hiding something far worse. His premonition manifested instantly. Boom! A series of massive explosions erupted from the main trench, the firestorm consuming a 20-meter stretch of the front line. Carnford engineers had waited until the trench was packed before detonating a chain of pull-fuse mines. The shockwave, laden with stone and shrapnel, tore through the area in a lethal fan. The trench was obliterated, ladders were pulverized into splinters, and the soldiers within were shredded like paper. Through the smoke, only mangled limbs remained, hanging from twisted stakes or buried in the earth. The air reeked of charred flesh and cordite, leaving a gaping, death-cleared void in the Solon offensive line. Thomas, further from the epicenter, was thrown to the frozen ground, his ears ringing and his insides churning. He looked up to see the site of his comrades' charge transformed into a silent, smoking ruin. At least 200 or 300 elite Solon soldiers had been lost in that single blast. On the main wall, I observed the chaos through my telescope as staff officers updated the tactical map. The pull-fuse mines were effective. The Solon center is crippled, a staff officer reported. I nodded. Harold's haste to focus on the center has left his flanks exposed, especially the right near Amber Bay, where he lacks cavalry cover. Order Leon's dragoons to strike the Solon right flank from the coastal gate. Disrupt their archers and musketeers, threaten their artillery, and force them to divide their attention. The messenger sprinted away. Orders were relayed via signals, and camouflaged gates on the Carnford right flank were pushed open. Dragoons. Mount up. Leon led 1,000 elite dragoons, a steel torrent gathering for the charge. Target the enemy flank. Scatter their ranged units. Harass the guns. Charge. Roar. The cavalry surged out in a wedge formation, their thunderous hooves shaking the earth like a moving wall. The Solonians were caught completely off guard by this unexpected mobile strike. Panic erupted among the Solon archers and musketeers as the steel tide emerged from the dust. Cavalry. Carnford cavalry on the right. Cries and horns rang out. The archers panicked. Scattered volleys failed to stop the armored dragoons. Leon fired his carbine, dropping a Solon officer mid-shout. Kill! The dragoons smashed into the disorganized Solon lines, sabers reaping the exposed infantry. They didn't linger, instead sweeping along the edge to sow chaos and drive the rout toward the Solon artillery positions. The Solon offensive collapsed. Harold was forced to divert his reserves and remaining cavalry to stabilize the flank, abandoning his support for the center. The pressure on the Carnford front line eased significantly. As the sun set, the battlefield was left in twilight, littered with the dead and broken gear. The roar of battle faded, replaced by the groans of the wounded and the cold wind. The day's bloody assault ended in a heavy, temporary defeat for the Solon army. Leon's dragoons had acted like a scalpel, gutting the Solon right flank and scattering their support troops. Harold had to personally intervene with his reserves to prevent a total collapse. During this frantic redeployment, the Solon troops were hammered by Carnford's heavy artillery, suffering heavy, avoidable losses. The Solonians eventually dug in behind makeshift breastworks, but their momentum was shattered. Nightfall brought a grim contrast to the battlefield. Both camps glowed with fires, illuminating the frantic activity of both sides. On the Solon side, slaves were driven by whips to dig new trenches and reinforce breastworks under the threat of execution. Those who collapsed were slaughtered, their heads displayed on poles to terrorize the survivors. The air was thick with despair and the stench of death. In Carnford, the defenders had already repaired the breaches in their earthen walls. The bastions remained vigilant, occasionally firing falconets or volleys to harass the Solon work crews, ensuring they found no peace in the dark. The heavy cannons on Carnford Mountain continued their rhythmic, ominous bombardment, shells tearing through the night to strike deep within the Solon camp, reminding Harold that his army remained under constant threat. Ordnance Bureau Chief Hector estimated the heavy cannons were at half their service life, yet their deterrent value remained irreplaceable. Inside the earth walls, the Carnford garrison rested in sheltered spots to conserve strength. Auxiliary squads moved silently through trenches, delivering supplies and medical aid while clearing wounded and repairing fortifications. Elite scout teams prowled the ruins outside the walls like nocturnal cats, monitoring for Solonian night raids. I stood on the northern wall, scanning the Solon camp's lights against the biting night wind. Moonlight revealed the Solonians frantically constructing a new earthbag defensive line behind their forward positions. The wall grew rapidly, clearly intended as a forward support point to withstand Carnford's artillery and potentially gain a height advantage. A sharp-eyed staff officer whispered, "They're digging in for a long war, trying to neutralize our terrain advantage with their own walls." I chuckled. "Their walls won't surpass our main ramparts. Our artillery will hammer their turtle shell from above." A nearby falconet fired, its shell striking the construction site. The explosion caused panic among the slaves and halted their progress. However, I noted, we cannot let them fortify at will. Passive defense is the worst strategy. Summon Brendan, Roland, and Leon to the command post. Yes. Soon, the underground command post was illuminated by candles, revealing a massive sand table and the weary faces of Brendan, Roland, and Leon. I cut straight to the point. Report today's casualties. Brendan reported 310 total casualties, 107 dead, 83 severely wounded, and 120 lightly wounded, with losses concentrated in Roland's center sector. Roland added, "The Solonians fought desperately. At least 500 to 600 fell before my lines, mostly slaves and auxiliaries. Their main forces suffered only 300 to 400 losses, mostly from our artillery and landmines." Leon reported. The dragoons lost 11 dead and 30 horses, but we disrupted their flanks, killed 200, and forced them to split their forces. I marked the sand table as I listened, then stood tall to address my commanders. Solonian losses exceed 1,500 slaves, 500 auxiliaries, and 300 to 400 main troops. Crucially, they lost over 20 forward cannons and vast amounts of siege equipment. The exchange ratio is nearly 10 to 1. Harold's morale is shattered. They are building walls to lick their wounds, not to advance. Brendan warned, they might be using this as a springboard for a larger offensive or a long-term siege. Regardless, we won't let them. Harold tried to threaten my family. Now it is time for revenge. The commander's faces hardened with rage at the mention of the threat to my wife and child. I have decided, at 3 a.m., when they are most exhausted, we launch a counter-raid. Command, give the order. Roland demanded, his eyes burning with battle lust. I detailed the plan. At 2 a.m., all artillery will bombard their flanks and rear to create chaos, while small units feign a full-scale assault to force them into a defensive posture. Second, form an elite 350-man grenadier company from our veterans, equipped with axes, maces, and satchel charges. Add 150 musketeers with bayonets for cover. Total force, 500 men, carrying 600 satchel charges and 100 grenades. I looked at Roland and Brendan. Choose the most ruthless officers. Tell the men, we aren't defending tonight. We are smashing Harold's skull. Yes, they shouted in unison. I traced the route on the sand table. We strike from the center right, where the terrain is familiar and their walls are weakest. Your mission is destruction, not occupation. Target their walls, command posts, supplies, and cannons. Brendan's 2nd Battalion will establish a fallback position to cover the retreat. Harold's army is a hodgepodge of factions. If we strike one hard enough to break it, the others will falter. We will target the unit that attacked most fiercely today, the one that will be most vulnerable. Leon realized. The others will fear being next, causing hesitation and internal strife. Exactly. I slammed my fist on the table. We will use this raid to sow fear and collapse their unity. Tonight's target is Ulf's Wolf Legion. Prepare every detail, personnel, equipment, and signals perfectly. Understood, my lord. In the dead of night, 500 elite veterans gathered in the dark, silent and determined. These men, the newly formed Grenadier Assault Team, were the blade meant to pierce the enemy's heart. Soldiers checked their gear, including belts strapped with over 20 small, iron-cased grenades. Their belts held satchel charges packed with Hector's specialized granulated black powder and iron shrapnel. Their primary weapon was a short-barreled, large-bore blunderbuss, more like a handheld cannon. These fired a lethal fan of lead pellets at close range, hammers already cocked for immediate action. For melee, each carried a slender, resilient rapier, perfect for the tight confines of trenches and fortifications. Officers whispered the final order. We are here to destroy. Ignite, throw, fire, and kill. Then retreat. Harold dared touch the Lord's family. We will make him pay tenfold. For comfort. For the Lord. 500 men whispered, their eyes burning with vengeance as I watched them depart at 3 a.m. 2 red fireworks shrieked into the sky over Conford, exploding into eerie halos that bathed the bloody earth in crimson, the signal for the general assault. The Conford line erupted like a volcano. Artillery, fire. Boom, boom, boom. Over 150 cannons across the walls and bastions unleashed blinding, multimeter muzzle flashes. The thunderous roar shook the earth, tearing the air as solid shot, explosive shells, and canister shot rained down on the Solon camp. The night sky was illuminated by crisscrossing fire lines and explosions, a terrifying, apocalyptic display. Musketry crackled along the walls. While mostly a diversion, the dense noise and flashes successfully mimicked a full-scale offensive. Enemy attack. Full-scale attack. The Solon camp descended into chaos, with alarm horns, artillery impacts, and frantic shouting blending into a cacophony. Solon soldiers scrambled from their tents, blinded by the darkness and noise, unable to discern the main point of attack. Harold had anticipated retaliation, but the sheer scale of the bombardment caught the Solonians off guard. Sensory overload and darkness paralyzed the Solon command structure, causing defensive delays. The true strike began under the cover of this chaos. In a crater 30 paces from the unfinished Solon wall, an officer signaled, "Go." Shadows leaped forward, throwing torches toward the wall to distract the defenders. Enemies on the wall. Archers, fire. Solon archers appeared, but were met with a command. First detachment. Aim at the wall, fire. 150 muskets fired in unison, cutting down 30 archers instantly and forcing the rest to retreat. Grenadiers. Charge. Taking advantage of the gap, the grenadiers sprinted the final 30 paces to the wall. Working in teams of 3, they lit fuses on grenades and satchel charges, throwing them with practiced precision. Throw them in. Dozens of iron grenades and satchel charges arched over the wall into the crowded Solon trenches. What is that? Fire. Run. Panic erupted, followed by a series of deafening explosions. The pre-fragmented grenades tore through the air, turning the area into a sphere of lethal shrapnel. The satchel charges collapsed sections of the wall, hurling soldiers and debris into the air. The defensive line was shattered by the sudden, lethal barrage of smoke, fire, and gore. Breach. Advance. The grenadier officer led the charge through the collapsed wall into the heart of the Solon position. The assault devolved into a brutal, close-quarters bloodbath. Amidst the wreckage, dazed Solon soldiers were met by grenadiers wielding terrifying short-barreled weapons. Bang! Bang bang! Blunderbusses roared at point-blank range, spewing fire and lead pellets in a lethal fan shape. My face. My eyes. The close-range blast left Solon soldiers incapacitated, their bodies riddled with lead. The grenadiers discarded their empty blunderbusses and drew rapiers, striking like vipers. The rapiers excelled in the cramped trenches, offering superior speed and precision. Unlike the heavy Solon blades, the rapiers allowed for lethal strikes from any angle. The sound of blades piercing flesh filled the air. One soldier was skewered through the jaw. Another, attempting to block with a shield, was struck in the femoral artery. Moving in back-to-back teams, the grenadiers systematically mowed down the resistance. The narrow strip of land became a chorus of screams and clashing steel. Musketeer detachments followed, pushing deep into the camp to neutralize the Solon musketeer guard. Detachments. Forward. Disperse those musketeers. 150 musketeers advanced in formation, encountering the Solon musketeer guard, composed of Plantagenet defectors, who were scrambling to organize a counterattack. Both sides exchanged fire at less than 30 paces. Bang! 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 Gunfire erupted, filling the air with smoke. The well-trained Conford musketeers dropped over 20 enemies in the first volley. The musketeer guard returned fire, lead balls whistling past the Conford soldiers. Don't stop. Advance. Fix bayonets. A Conford officer roared, fixing his bayonet first. The musketeers let out a war cry, abandoning reloading to charge the Solonians with cold steel. Kill. Facing the forest of bayonets, the musketeer guards' morale shattered. They could handle a firefight, but the ferocity of the bayonet charge triggered their deep-seated fear of the Conford infantry. They're charging. Run. Don't block the way. Someone shouted, and the musketeer guard collapsed like a sandcastle before the tide of bayonets. Soldiers discarded their muskets and fled, colliding with incoming Solon reinforcements, causing mass trampling and casualties. Conford musketeers pursued, stabbing fleeing enemies in the back and spreading chaos. The Sparrow Legion's defensive sector was in total ruin. Grenadiers slaughtered in the trenches, musketeers routed the long-range units, and the camp burned amidst piles of corpses. Night amplified the terror. Solon soldiers, unaware of the enemy's numbers, were paralyzed by explosions, gunfire, and screams of "the Conford army is here." After 15 minutes, the Solonians finally rallied to counterattack, but the raiding party had already withdrawn. Having destroyed 2 field guns and caused massive casualties, the grenadiers executed their hit-and-run order without hesitation. They retreated with nearly 100 severed Solon heads as trophies and psychological warfare, ensuring every wounded comrade was carried out. Solon pursuit forces were halted by preset landmines and caltrops. As they cleared the obstacles, they were met by a devastating volley from Brendan's 3rd Battalion. Caught in the dark and disorganized, the Solonians retreated, leaving dozens of bodies behind as the Conford raiders vanished into the shadows. This brutal counterattack struck the center of Harold's army, specifically targeting Ulf's Sparrow Legion. The Sparrow Legion suffered heavy losses, over 500 combat soldiers dead or severely wounded, with even higher casualties among auxiliaries and slaves. Their camp and logistics were devastated, and their morale was crushed. Exhausted and terrified by the night's events, they were incapable of launching further offensives. For the first time since the war began, a long silence fell outside Conford. From dawn until noon, there was no shelling, no arrow rain, and no frantic charges. Only the wind howled across the wasteland, accompanied by the distant, wounded animal groans from the Solon camp and the sounds of Conford's repairs. Both sides used this precious interval to lick their wounds and recover. I slept deeply and for a long time. Since the Solon army arrived, especially after the cliffside raid, my nerves had been stretched to the breaking point. Command, patrols, administration, and worry for my family had kept me awake. Last night's successful revenge finally vented my pent-up frustration and dealt a heavy blow to the enemy. Exhausted, I slept until mid-morning, undisturbed even by the usual Solon harassment shelling, likely because Harold was too busy dealing with his own losses. Upon waking, I felt my energy restored. I reviewed the reports, expressing satisfaction with Brendan's performance. I then visited the Grenadiers and Musketeers, finding them proud and their wounded well cared for. With fewer than 50 casualties among 500 men, it was a brilliant tactical victory that boosted morale and eased the anxiety I felt for my family. I had avenged Charlotte and Klein, though I realized I hadn't seen them properly in a long time. I had hidden them in the bank's vault for safety, but my longing for them grew during this rare moment of peace. I found Charlotte playing with Klein, who was bundled in a cotton coat, reaching for a colorful yarn ball with wide, happy blue eyes. Bathed in morning light, the scene felt unreal, isolated from the world of blood and death outside. Charlotte looked up, her short golden hair glowing, and offered a soft, genuine smile. "How do you have time to come here?" she asked, dusting off her hands. I leaned in to hug my son, who smelled of milk and sunlight, before looking at Charlotte. "I paid Harold a visit last night. It was loud enough that he probably didn't sleep, so he's too weak to bother us today." Charlotte realized I meant the night raid and the explosions. "Serves him right," she said, turning Klein toward me. "Look, Klein, Daddy got revenge for you. The bad men who scared you won't be sleeping either." Klein didn't understand, but sensing his parents' emotions, he giggled and reached out for me. My heart softened as I touched my son's cheek and looked at Charlotte. "Want to take a walk?" I suggested. They strolled along the gravel path, with Klein pointing excitedly at a bare tree. Charlotte's gaze drifted past the high walls toward Amber Bay. Even in wartime, sails from the Duchy of Schmidt and France City could be seen, bringing vital supplies and reinforcements to Conford. "Believe in yourself and what you've built, Carl," Charlotte said firmly. "We can hold them. Our strength grows with reinforcements and supplies, while Harold's forces are weakening from casualties, low morale, and internal strife." She looked at him with analytical calm. "Don't just think about defense, consider a counterattack. Harold's army is exhausted and vulnerable. He thinks Conford is a hard bone to chew, but it could become the hammer that shatters his teeth." Carl was surprised by her strategic insight. "You're right. I'm already planning a counter. Harold won't find it easy to leave. Conford isn't his backyard." Charlotte nodded, satisfied. They walked on in comfortable silence, their shadows intertwined in the sunlight. Suddenly, Charlotte paused, glancing toward a scenic villa district by the sea. "Princess Louise lives in one of those villas, doesn't she? It's a beautiful spot." Carl felt a jolt of alarm but kept his expression neutral, glancing at her profile. "Yes," Carl replied naturally. "She lives there. It's better than being a decorative puppet in the cold rooms of the royal capital." Charlotte's lips curved in a subtle, unreadable expression. She turned to look at him, her gaze piercing. "You seem quite concerned about her." "Not at all," Carl denied quickly. "I only receive periodic reports from her maids. Given her status and presence on my land, It's a matter of duty and basic etiquette to ensure her safety. Seeing his panicked reaction, Charlotte burst into a light, relieved laugh that brightened her face. Why so nervous? I'm just curious. She was your wife, after all. Her smile softened. I'm glad you've provided her with relative freedom instead of cruelty. It shows my Carl isn't a heartless man who only uses force. She reached out and brushed a lock of hair from his forehead. We are responsible for past mistakes, but the future is what matters. I believe in you and our choices. Their son, Klein, squirmed in Carl's arms, reaching for Charlotte and babbling, "Ma." Charlotte took the boy, her expression turning tender as she comforted him. Watching her, the tension in Carl's chest dissolved, replaced by warmth and relief. This crisis had only served to dissolve the final, subtle barrier between them. Her inquiry had been a test, followed by acceptance. He stood beside her, watching their son. The sun was bright, the breeze gentle, and the harbor was full of life. His resolve to counterattack and protect this life had never been stronger. In the following days, the stalemate outside Carnford deepened. The Solonians abandoned large-scale charges, focusing instead on building 2 lines of earthworks. Slaves were driven to pile earth and stone, turning simple breastworks into extensive, albeit crude, fortifications to negate Carnford's terrain advantage. The front lines were barely 100 meters apart, close enough to hear the digging and see the sentries. With physical combat paused, a more insidious war began, psychological warfare and insults. The Solonians started first, using crude iron megaphones to taunt the Carnford garrison. Cowards, hiding in your turtle shells. Karl von Schmidt. Traitor, you divorced the princess. Do you intend to rebel? These insults focused on Karl's divorce and alleged disloyalty to the throne. The Carnford soldiers, hardened by blood, initially responded with laughter and sporadic gunfire. Soon, Richter's intelligence bureau retaliated with a more systematic campaign, using fluent captives and borderlanders to broadcast sharp counter-insults. Solonian savages, go back to your ice fields. Harold, do you remember the wolf cavalry who froze to death outside Eglinist? You stole our grain and slaughtered our kin. This blood debt will be repaid. The shouts ignited the soldiers' rage, reminding them of the atrocities committed during Solonian raids. Karl even contributed, scripting insults based on internal Solonian tribal tensions. He crafted scandalous rumors about Harold and the tribal elders' wives, turning them into catchy, vulgar rhymes. Ha ha! Hey, Commander Ulf, is your bed still warm back home? The Carnford soldiers jeered. These absurd rumors spread quickly among the Solonian rank and file, sowing suspicion and anger. The Solonians, enraged, fired their cannons blindly at the trenches, but the Carnford soldiers remained safely behind their reinforced cover. Amidst the noise, the dangerous, monotonous digging continued in the trenches. Thomas and his group of emaciated slaves worked the frozen earth with pickaxes. To Thomas, progress had a new meaning. Digging faster only meant getting closer to Carnford's snipers, artillery, and hidden landmines. Thomas and his 7 or 8 emaciated, hollow-eyed slave laborers huddled in a narrow, damp trench, listlessly hacking at the frozen earth with short-handled pickaxes. Progress? Thomas now understood it differently. Digging faster only brought him closer to Carnford's snipers, artillery, and landmines. Digging faster only brought them closer to Carnford's walls, increasing the risk of being targeted by snipers, artillery, or hidden landmines. Thomas learned the hard way that working too fast meant being targeted by Carnford's falconets. One round of canister shot turned the trenches into a slaughterhouse. Now, Thomas plays it smart. When Einar inspects, Thomas cracks his whip and shouts, feigning diligent supervision. Once Einar leaves, he slows the slaves down, ordering them to repair walls or clear non-existent cave-ins. He tells them, steady now. Keep working, but stay alive. Why rush to your graves? Carnford's counterattacks have become increasingly precise. The Sparrow Legion's sector is hit daily. Ulf's troops have lost half their men, and morale has hit rock bottom. Thomas hears that Solon units have reached a tacit agreement. Unless attacked, they avoid provoking Carnford, hiding in existing fortifications to prioritize survival over progress. Ulf and his Sparrow Legion seem cursed. My strikes are surgical, consistently bypassing other units to devastate the Sparrow Legion. Between night raids, sniping, and artillery, Ulf's men are vanishing and morale is shattered. Soldiers whisper that I am targeting them specifically for their role in the Cliffside night raid. Ulf is overwhelmed, his resentment toward Harold growing. He knows Harold is centralizing power by weakening independent veteran units like his. But using me as a blade to bleed his own elite troops is both cruel and strategically foolish. After losing 30 more men in a skirmish, Ulf finally confronts Harold in his command tent. Harold is aware of the losses and the rumors of his using a borrowed knife to kill. While he wants to weaken Ulf, he cannot risk a total collapse of the Sparrow Legion, which would jeopardize the entire front. He orders Ulf to swap positions with Isgir's Tiger Legion. During the chaotic handover, Conford's staff seizes the opportunity for a swift raid. A small elite force infiltrates the night, striking the Tiger Legion's outpost and supply depot, burning grain and siege equipment before retreating. Harold is furious but helpless, ordering tighter security during rotations. The Solon army's morale dips further, while Conford's defenders are emboldened by their leader's perceived foresight. Forced to change tactics, Harold abandons large-scale assaults for methodical tunneling. Paved with the bodies of slaves, the Solon trenches snake forward until they are just 20 paces from Conford's wall, close enough to hear the defenders coughing. At this range, cannons are too risky, but infantry throwing weapons become lethal. Harold orders his craftsmen to copy Conford's cast iron grenades and satchel charges. Though crude and unreliable, they are effective enough to cause chaos at such close range. They also produce Molotov cocktails using oil and rags, arming their soldiers with Conford's own patented weapons. The 20-pace gap becomes a new, deadly meat grinder. Behind a scarred section of the wall, Weber eats cold black bread and salted meat, sitting on ammo crates. He wears standard leather armor and a dirty gray coat, sporting a fresh scar from a Solon arrow. His expression is detached, contrasting with the nervous younger soldiers. A former sailor under Werner, Weber came to Conford after the sea battles. Though he was granted land after the war, he found the quiet life of a farmer unbearable. He rented out his land and rejoined the standing army. He thrives in combat, rising to sergeant in charge of 6 musketeers due to his experience and grit. He is married to Mia, a former prostitute. Their shared history of hardship allows them to understand each other deeply. Mia works in a clothing factory, and knowing she waits for him gives Weber a sense of purpose beyond the battlefield. Nearby, a soldier with a hoarse voice mocks the Solon army through a megaphone, drawing muffled laughter from behind the wall. Weber smirks, but remains vigilant. At 20 paces, anything can happen. Suddenly, bang! A flintlock musket fires from point-blank range, followed by a roar of savage, bloodthirsty screams. For the Emperor. Kill them all. Level Conford. Hundreds of Solon soldiers surge from the trenches like demons, launching a desperate charge. Night raid. Direct front, the sentry screams. Weber reacts instantly, grabbing his musket and a grease-soaked torch, lighting it with a strike of his fire steel. Light the torches. Illuminate them. He hurls the torch. Other veterans follow suit, casting light on the charging Solonians wielding axes and incendiary bundles. Falconet. Fire. A 4-pounder falconet on the platform fires, unleashing a storm of 70 iron balls and nails. The front line of Solon soldiers is shredded, but the rest trample over the corpses, charging to within 10 paces of the wall. Pikemen, stand up. Form ranks. An officer roared behind the earthen wall. The Night Watch pikemen leaped up, rushing to the parapets to form a dense spear formation, their long spear tips bristling outward. Western Reserve. Move to the center. Quickly. Sharp whistles and running messengers signaled the Western Musketeer detachment to reinforce the center through the communication trenches. Whoosh bang! A red signal flare soared into the night sky behind the second earthen wall, bursting into an ominous blood-red glow. This highest-level alert signaled a major Solonian night raid, putting the entire defense into combat readiness. The Conford line, centered on the attacked middle sector, transformed into a waking beast. Weber ignored the chaos, focusing entirely on his 6 veteran musketeers, who remained steady despite the tension. Listen, no volley fire. Fire in sequence to maintain constant pressure. You first. Target the torchbearer. You second. The flag bearer. Weber commanded, aiming his own musket at a shouting Solonian leader. Bang! Weber's shot hit the leader, followed by a continuous rhythm of musket fire that pinned the charging Solonians 10 paces from the wall. Bullets whistled and arrows thudded into the walls and screens. As Solonian archers and musketeers provided cover, a soldier was hit in the shoulder. Weber barked, "Auxiliary! Drag him down. Next man, fill the gap." Boom! The leading Solonians triggered the Carnford engineers' pressure plate mines, turning the area into a slaughterhouse of fire and limbs. Undeterred, the Solonians pushed over their own dead, reaching the final obstacle, the anti-cavalry trench. Auxiliaries, get on the wall. Throw caltrops and torches. Auxiliaries rushed up, dumping baskets of sharp caltrops onto the trench and the ground beyond, while lighting up the area with thrown torches. The torches ignited oil-soaked firewood in the trench, turning the area into a bright stage that revealed the frantic faces of the Solonians. Throw! Solonian soldiers hurled sputtering cloth bundles and ceramic pots at the wall. Satchel charges. Molotovs. Take cover, the officer screamed. Bang! Bang bang! The crude explosives detonated on the parapet, wounding several defenders with shrapnel and flames. Medics! Stretchers! Move! The officer croaked. Amidst the brief confusion, the Solonians howled, attempting to hook scaling ladders onto the wall. Weber's pupils contracted as a sputtering iron grenade landed less than a meter from my feet. It was a crude Solonian copy, its fuse burning rapidly in the dark. Nearby soldiers recoiled in terror. My mind turned ice cold. Instinct took over. I lunged forward, grabbing the hot, smoking iron ball. With the force of a hammer thrower, I hurled the deadly object back toward the enemy. The grenade tumbled through the air, leaving a trail of sparks. The Solonians, confused by the returning projectile, threw it back again, its fuse still burning. Damn it! I cursed, adrenaline surging. Relying on muscle memory, I caught the grenade again as it landed, the iron casing searing my skin. Go to hell! I roared, throwing it back over the wall with even greater force. Boom! The grenade exploded above the Solonian ranks, raining shrapnel down upon them. An eye for an eye. Grenadiers. Satchel charges. Grenades. Throw them back, the commander ordered. Carnford Grenadiers unleashed their superior, reliable ordnance. Whoosh! A swarm of grenades and satchel charges arched over the wall, landing among the Solonian assault force. Boom, boom, boom. The area erupted in continuous explosions. The Solonians were decimated, their own inferior copies failing them repeatedly. Some exploded in their hands, others were thrown back by defenders, and many were duds. The Carnford line stabilized, cannons roared and muskets fired in rhythm. After leaving hundreds of corpses, the Solonian assault collapsed and retreated into the smoke. I slumped against the wall, gasping for air, my palm blistered and scorched from the grenade. "Sergeant, are you okay?" a soldier asked. Weber shook his head and took a long drink from his canteen. I looked out at the sporadic explosions. The Solonians were still throwing their unreliable copies, but the threat had passed. Further down the line, soldiers watched the fireworks with detached curiosity, as if observing a play. War was truly absurd. One moment you were fighting for your life, the next you were a spectator. I wiped my face and picked up my musket. The night was long, and I had to stay vigilant, for my brothers, and for Mia back at the factory. Harold stood on a forward observation platform, staring at the smoke-shrouded Carnford line. The sulphurous wind and scent of blood didn't seem to register as he watched the flashes in the mist. This new tactic, using slaves to draw fire and smoke to mask the advance of elite troops, was certainly smarter than the previous pure meat-grinder charges. Thick smoke hindered the Carnford garrison's aim, allowing Solon soldiers to reach the earth walls. Though repelled by fierce counterattacks, they proved the defense could be breached. Casualties inflicted on the defenders over the past few days have risen compared to previous artillery and landmine bombardments. Harold realized that brute force was ineffective against Carnford's shell. He needed the very tactics he had learned from his enemies, despite the high cost. The quartermaster reported that 500 pounds of gunpowder were consumed today, leaving only 3,500 pounds in stock. With supplies from Flossgard delayed by snow for at least a week, the Craftsman Battalion requested a halt to heavy artillery fire to conserve resources. Harold's eyelids twitched. At this rate, their gunpowder would last only 6 or 7 days. Yet Carnford's walls remained standing. He watched his precious gunpowder vanish into smoke and noise, seemingly without decisive effect. Granted, he rasped. Harold replaced the resting Sparrow Legion with the Tiger Legion and the Musketeer Guard. To his dismay, Luo Yao and his Musketeer Guard performed miserably in the bloody center. These Plantagenet defectors crumbled under pressure, their morale shattering after facing Carnford's fierce counterattacks and psychological warfare. Within 2 days of skirmishing, entire units began deserting or surrendering. Harold received frequent reports of soldiers, including junior officers, abandoning weapons and crawling toward Carnford's anti-cavalry trenches to surrender. Carnford's promise to spare and feed captives spread like a plague, further demoralizing the remaining auxiliary troops and slaves. Harold cursed Luo Yao, his initial appreciation replaced by cold disappointment. These outsiders were unreliable. His gaze drifted toward Amber Bay, shimmering in the winter sun. By now, the northern frontier's bays should have been frozen, desolate wastelands. Instead, he spotted a large merchant ship from the south breaking through the ice toward the Carnford docks. "Why is Amber Bay not frozen?" Harold whispered. The quartermaster explained that the Carnford people used labor, livestock, and explosives to break the ice daily, keeping the shipping lane open. Harold fell silent. A profound sense of powerlessness and cold fury washed over him. Carnford leveraged its geography to maintain a luxury supply line from Duke Schmidt and distant trade cities. While they received endless food, ammunition, and reinforcements, Harold's own supply lines were failing, his gunpowder was depleting, and his army was crumbling. The siege had become a farce. He could no longer afford the war. Sven watched Harold's side profile. The king appeared calm, but Sven knew this emptiness was more terrifying than rage. The fire that once fueled Harold's ambition was now reduced to embers. Harold's wavering went beyond the failed siege or the gunpowder shortage. The fatal blow was the pervasive loss of confidence throughout the Solon army. No one believed they could take Carnford anymore. They only calculated the mounting, bottomless cost in lives. The thought of retreat sent a chill down Sven's spine. A retreat after months of heavy losses would shatter Harold's reputation as an invincible conqueror. Discontented tribal leaders would seize the chance to revolt, potentially causing the Solon kingdom to collapse. To advance was a dilemma. To retreat was an abyss. After a long silence, Harold turned away from the battlefield. "Order the Legion commanders and unit leaders to the royal tent for a military conference tomorrow at dusk." His subordinates understood that the fate of the Solon kingdom hung in the balance. Would he gamble everything on a final, desperate assault, or seek a dignified end to this disastrous expedition? Everyone's heart sank. Inside the Carnford command post, the atmosphere was heavy and solemn. Candles illuminated the faces of the leaders seated around a large oak table. I presided, with Brendan, Roland, Richter, and Edgar reviewing maps and reports. "Harold's patience and resources are nearly exhausted," I stated. "Unlike Eaglenest, Carnford has Amber Bay's constant supplies and hardened defenses. A long siege is suicide for the Solonians." The general staff agrees that Harold's only option is one final, all-out attack to inflict damage before retreating with his remaining dignity. Otherwise, his army will be hollowed out before they even return home. The group turned to Edgar for the logistics report. Edgar adjusted his glasses. 47 days into the siege, we have suffered 1,237 dead, 895 severely wounded, and about 2,000 lightly wounded. Total casualties are around 4,100, mostly from the first earth wall defense. We have consumed 18,000 shells and 90,000 pounds of gunpowder, but thanks to the Amber Bay supply line, our reserves remain safe. We have enough food to hold for 6 months. Our soldiers have proven that Harold's invasion was a massive mistake." Richter added, "Harold's new grenade and smoke tactic is slightly more sophisticated than his previous brute force charges, but it only marginally improves his exchange ratio. Everything hinges on gunpowder. Intelligence shows Solon lacks production capacity, relying on meager stockpiles and salvaged supplies. They use 10,000 pounds of powder at Eaglenest. Staff estimates their current Conford reserves are between 25,000 and 30,000 pounds. I noted the numbers. At their current consumption rate for artillery and fire thunder, their stocks are nearing exhaustion. Scouts report declining heavy artillery fire. Once the powder runs out, their weapons become scrap, and they'll be forced into a primitive melee against our muskets and bayonets, an era that ended at Conford's walls. Richter concluded, Harold can't afford a long war. He must launch a decisive all-or-nothing assault before his resources vanish. With increased night movements and officer meetings, the final, desperate assault will come within 2 days. Prepare all ammunition and melee weapons. We must break the Solon army's spine during this charge. Brendan asked, should we move the 2 elite legions sent by the Count of Fran's city to the first wall to bolster our defense? I waved him off. No. Those troops are my hammer, not cannon fodder for trench attrition. The first wall isn't meant to hold forever. Its mission is to bleed Harold dry and shatter his morale. After 2 months of failure, his internal cohesion is fraying. If this final push fails, retreat will be his only option. But I don't just want him repelled. I want him crippled for a decade. Therefore, I am abandoning the first wall. Silence filled the command post. Brendan and Roland were stunned. Then realization dawned. First, I won't waste my precious soldiers in a meat grinder. I'll let his heavy blow strike empty air. Second, I'll give Harold a taste of victory to lure him into committing his final reserves and morale against the wall and the main city. Once his forces are overextended and his formation is chaotic from victory, we launch our counterattack. The Black Eagle Legion, Leon's Dragoons, and our fresh reserves will crush them. The wall will become their graveyard. Draft an orderly withdrawal plan. Make it look like a desperate, failing defense. Leave behind minor supplies and stage small route maneuvers. Ensure the main force, especially artillery, retreats safely to the main wall. It must look chaotic but be perfectly organized. I turned to Richter. Use the Intelligence Bureau. Send scouts from Amber Bay to monitor Harold's headquarters, reserves, and logistics. I need to know every move he makes to time our counterattack perfectly. Yes, sir. The group replied, their eyes burning with resolve. 2 days later, before dawn, the silence outside Conford was shattered by 3 shrill horns. Torches ignited across the Solon camp, revealing a sea of shadows surging forward. Fire! Harold pushed over 200 cannons to the front, unleashing a thunderous barrage. Boom! The earth shook as solid shots and explosive shells rained down on the first wall. Projectiles tore through the air, smashing into the breastworks and sending clouds of debris into the sky. Conford's artillery responded instantly, weaving a web of destruction in the pre-dawn darkness. Solon's accuracy was poor, but they possessed 10 high-quality 12-pound bronze cannons from the Plantagenet kingdom. Harold used these to target key defensive points. Boom! A 12-pound shot smashed through the wall, obliterating a bunker filled with soldiers and ammunition. The explosion tore bodies apart, leaving a gaping hole in the wall and causing heavy casualties. The direct fire from heavy artillery was devastating. This surprise barrage caused the most severe damage since the siege began. As the shelling continued, Solon's infantry charged. Attack! For the king. For Solon. Charge! Death to those who retreat. Driven by whips and fear, over 5,000 slaves rushed toward the trembling wall. First line. Ready, fire! Despite the shelling, the Conford defenders held their ground. Bang, bang, bang. The volley mowed down the front ranks, but the slaves behind them stepped over the corpses, driven by terror. Full fire. Free fire. Stop them. Conford's defenses erupted. Rockets, cannons, and canister shot tore through the human tide. The cacophony of gunfire, explosions, and screams created a deafening symphony of death. Grenades and satchel charges turned the front line into a hellish fog of smoke, shrapnel, and the stench of burning flesh, reducing visibility to under 20 paces. The battle raged across the line, but the center, held by Liao's musketeer guard, was the site of the most brutal carnage. Facing Harold's ultimatum, a desperate Luo Yao donned his armor, and stood 50 paces behind the front, flanked by his ruthless execution squad to ensure his own survival. Charge! Anyone who turns back dies. Luo Yao shrieked, his voice distorted by madness. His execution squad cut down any soldier who hesitated. They forced even untrained troops to fire old matchlock muskets blindly into the smoke to create chaos. Solonians concentrated their remaining heavy artillery here, firing indiscriminately into the smoke, while the Carnford garrison responded with precise, concentrated fire. Blinded by smoke, the slaves surged toward the areas with the least resistance, driven forward by the execution squad and the roar of artillery. As soldiers fell to friendly fire or trampling, the execution squad butchered those who collapsed, forcing the survivors to charge the death trap wall in a primal frenzy. After paying a staggering price, the slaves finally reached the anti-cavalry trench before the wall. Forced to bridge the gap with ladders and logs, many were shot and fell into the trench, impaled on sharpened stakes amidst horrific screams. The trench soon filled with a grisly bridge of corpses and wounded men. Seeing the path cleared, the Solon Main Legion let out a bestial roar. They charged over the twitching bodies, their faces twisted with bloodlust as they stormed the wall. The Carnford garrison fought back fiercely from their breastworks, turning the area into a blood-soaked mire of corpses. Despite heavy casualties, the Solonians' sheer numbers and suicidal fervor allowed them to push through. Under the cover of smoke, they finally managed to lean dozens of scaling ladders against the wall. Scale the wall. Kill them all. Solon soldiers climbed the blood-slicked ladders, facing spears, stones, and point-blank musket fire, with fresh waves instantly replacing those who fell. Both sides engaged in a desperate grenade-throwing duel, turning the ramparts into a slaughterhouse of fire and shrapnel. After immense losses, the first Solon soldier crested the wall, only to be skewered by spears, a signal for the rest. As more Solonians breached the wall, the Carnford garrison's casualties spiked during the ensuing melee. The defensive line was finally torn open in multiple places. Weber's flintlock musket smoked, the metal barrel searing hot in the cold air. He had just shot a Solon soldier through the eye, saving his young musketeer, Tom, from a lethal axe blow. "Thanks, boss," Tom shouted, his bayonet still dripping with blood. "Shut up. Watch the right," Weber barked, scanning the chaotic battlefield. Their section of the wall was now an isolated island, surrounded by encroaching enemies. The air was filled with the deafening roar of combat and dying screams. A Solon soldier charged their position, brandishing a shield and a heavy blade. Weber stepped forward, meeting the charge with his bayonet-fixed musket. With a swift motion, he parried the soldier's blade with his musket barrel. The soldier's weapon flew from his hand. Weber slammed his musket but into the soldier's shield arm, creating an opening, and thrust his bayonet through the gap. The blade struck true. Weber twisted the blade and withdrew it, leaving the soldier to collapse in a heap. More enemies swarmed in, and Weber's heart sank. These were not the usual slaves or levies. Clad in iron-reinforced armor and wielding high-quality weapons, these were Harold's true elite guards. Their arrival tipped the scales, shattering the defenders' formation. "Hold together. Rally to me," Weber roared. His 6 musketeers retreated to a defensible position behind a collapsed breastwork. The 7 men formed a tight bayonet circle, firing and stabbing with disciplined precision. Despite their efforts, the Solonians kept coming, undeterred by the mounting pile of their own dead. Weber's arms were numb, his bayonet dulled, and his men were wounded, yet they continued to fight. Suddenly, a sharp, rhythmic trumpet blast cut through the din, the signal for the second phase of the retreat. Weber realized the plan. The wall had served its purpose to exhaust the enemy, and now they were to lure the Solonians deeper into the trap by retreating to the main wall. While the veterans understood, the ordinary soldiers panicked, hearing only the order to abandon the crumbling line. "We can't hold. Run. Back to the city." The defensive line, once holding firm, collapsed like a sandcastle losing its foundation. Soldiers, especially those leaderless and battered, fled toward the heavy drawbridge over the moat. To feign a rout, some discarded flags, broken muskets, and helmets, running in apparent panic. The Solonians cheered wildly. believing the Carnford people had finally broken. Their morale surged, and they pursued aggressively, with small squads attempting to rush the moat. Just as the first Solonians reached the lowering drawbridge or tried to cross the moat, countless musket barrels emerged from the city wall embrasures. Bang, bang, bang. A lethal, point-blank volley rained down from above. The Solonian pursuers fell like wheat before a scythe, many tumbling into the spike-filled moat with agonizing screams. The defenders had the area locked down, turning any exposed Solonian into a target. My squad held their position behind a breastwork, observing the chaos. They were positioned near a wide path where retreating Carnford soldiers and flanking Solonian pursuers converged. "Boss, the signal is to retreat. What do we do?" Tom shouted, his face smeared with blood and sweat. "I know," I snapped. "But if we run now, we expose our backs. We hold here to cover the others. Reload. Aim for that flanking squad." My command was absolute. Despite their fear, the 6 musketeers obeyed. They reloaded behind cover and fired 2 rapid volleys at a dozen Solonians attempting to cut off the retreat. Bang, bang, bang. The lead balls struck true, dropping 4 or 5 Solonians and forcing the rest to scramble for cover. A group of Carnford soldiers seized the chance to dash toward the drawbridge. "Good work. Move. Prevent retaliation," I ordered, shifting my squad to the other side of the breastwork just as enemy fire raked their previous position. Like a stubborn reef in a torrent, my squad moved to intercept Solonians wherever they threatened the retreat, buying precious seconds for their comrades. Seeing the flow of retreating soldiers thinning, I knew it was time. Last one. Tom, grenade. Tom ignited a small Carnford grenade and hurled it at an approaching squad of 7 or 8 Solonians. Whoosh, boom. The grenade exploded in their midst, sending the squad into a chaotic, bloody mess and halting their pursuit. "Retreat. To the drawbridge. Cover each other." I sprinted toward the bridge, my men following in pairs, watching their backs. The drawbridge was already at a 45-degree angle, rising steadily. The last Carnford soldiers scrambled up the incline as defenders provided covering fire. My squad sprinted through the muddy, corpse-strewn ground. A soldier took a stray arrow to the leg. I and Tom immediately hoisted him up and kept running. 20 paces to the bridge. It was tilted past 60 degrees, and the bridge was nearly empty of their own. 15 paces. Enemy fire intensified, thudding into the earth around them. 10 paces. I could see the frost and blood on the bridge's iron chains. Suddenly, a lone Solonian elite leaped from behind a ruined wall, eyes wild with bloodlust, and lunged at me like a leopard. Caught off guard while carrying the wounded man, I was tackled to the ground. "Boss," Tom cried, but was forced back by enemy arrows. The Solonian pinned me, gripping my throat with one hand and driving a bone dagger toward my face with the other. My combat instincts kicked in. I jerked my head, the blade grazing my cheek and burying into the frozen earth. I kneed the attacker in the stomach and seized the man's wrist. We wrestled in the mud, the dagger trembling between us. The Solonian's strength was immense, pushing the blade toward my eyes. With a guttural roar, I released my grip on the wrist and slammed my forehead into the Solonian's unprotected nose. Crack! The Solonian shrieked, his vision blurred by blood and agony, his grip loosening. I flipped the attacker off, grabbed a jagged, blood-stained chunk of frozen earth, and smashed it into the man's temple. Bang! 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 The Solonian went limp, his skull crushed. I stood, gasping, my body aching. I looked at the drawbridge. My heart sank. The bridge was nearly vertical, 2 or 3 meters off the ground, and still rising. My squad was already on the bridge, waving frantically, but they were out of reach. Driven by survival, I took a deep breath and sprinted toward the rising, iron-reinforced oak bridge. I leaped off a corpse, launching myself at the bridge's bottom edge, 3.5 meters in the air. Time slowed as I stretched my arms toward the rough wood and iron rivets. Slap! My fingers hooked onto a protruding iron edge at the base of the bridge. The jolt nearly dislocated my shoulders, but I held on, dangling like a rag in the wind. Grab him! Hurry! Comrades reached over the edge of the drawbridge, grabbing Weber's arms and collar. He kicked against the rough surface, helping them pull him up. Heave! They shouted in unison. Weber tumbled onto the cold wooden planks, coughing violently as he inhaled smoke-filled air. The drawbridge slammed shut against the wall with a heavy thud, locking out the Solonians' roars and the sounds of the hellish battlefield. Lying there, Weber watched the brightening sky, feeling the profound relief of being alive. His wounds stung, but his mind was calm. He had held his position and brought his men back. He gripped his flintlock, ready for what came next. As long as he breathed, he remained a sergeant of Confort. Morning light pierced the smoke as Harold stepped onto the blood-soaked, ruined outer earth wall his soldiers had paid dearly to capture. The wall was a graveyard of broken spears, shattered shields, and countless corpses. The air reeked of blood, charred flesh, and gunpowder. Surviving Solon soldiers numbly cleared the dead, tossing their own into piles for burning. Any faint groans from the dying were quickly silenced. Harold ignored the carnage, his gaze fixed ahead. 50 paces away lay the deep, cold moat. Beyond it, the main wall of Conford loomed, 10 meters of massive stone, riddled with firing slits. The wall featured protruding bastions like fangs, with cannons aimed silently from the battlements. This deadly, impenetrable fortress stood like a dormant steel beast, mocking the exhausted conquerors below. Harold felt no joy, only heavy fatigue and the sting of being outplayed. He realized the Conford garrison hadn't been routed. They had retreated in perfect order to this superior defensive line. "Carl," Harold whispered bitterly, "you won't even grant me a fair fight." He had exhausted his gunpowder and reserves on grenades and satchel charges, hoping to win a bloody victory to restore his reputation. He had craved a decisive clash to prove his worth. Instead, I, like a cunning fox, had retreated to my den and slammed the door, leaving Harold with nothing. Harold understood the trap. By ceding the outer wall, I had shortened my lines and lured the Solon army into a kill zone. I was likely waiting with mobile cavalry, wolves in the shadows, to strike the moment Harold's army faltered or attempted to retreat. "You want me to bleed out here?" Harold thought, mocking himself. He had once believed his 100,000 troops could conquer anything. Now, a mere earth wall had cost him half his momentum and resources. The sight of the main city filled him with a crushing sense of powerlessness. Exhausted soldiers, dwindling supplies, and rumors of instability back home weighed on him like chains. Since I had generously yielded the earth wall, Harold realized it was his only exit. He could claim a strategic victory to save face. He lacked the strength to throw his remaining tens of thousands into that steel tomb. Yet, retreating was dangerous. To pull back while an enemy waited to strike was to expose his back to the blade. He knew my dragoons and the Northern Iron Cavalry were waiting for the chaos of a retreat to launch a lethal pursuit. Managing this withdrawal would be his most difficult test yet. Suddenly, boom! A violent explosion rocked the ground to his left, sending smoke and body parts into the air. Solon engineers had triggered booby traps hidden beneath a discarded falconet. The blast tore the cannon and 6 soldiers to pieces. Panic rippled through the survivors as they scrambled away from the spoils. Harold closed his eyes. Even the scraps of victory were paid for in blood. Every gift from me was barbed. A profound weariness consumed him. He had to retreat. The nightmare at Conford had to end, even if the reality awaiting him was crueler. He took one last look at the silent fortress and turned away, his silhouette lonely against the smoke and pale light. Morning mist and smoke clung to the fields outside Conford. I and my staff stood on the main wall, watching the Solonians through binoculars. The view was clear and grim. Solon's soldiers moved sluggishly behind the captured wall, their exhaustion evident as they struggled to fortify their new, hollow position. The Solon camp showed no signs of a new offensive. Instead, increased, scattered cooking smoke suggested the soldiers were resting and eating. "Harold is digesting his losses," a young staff officer remarked with a sneer. "They broke their teeth trying to chew through the position we abandoned." Another officer reported with suppressed excitement. "We've confirmed over 900 Solon combat soldier heads from the earth walls, plus countless auxiliary and slave casualties. Including those buried or dragged away, they've suffered at least 2,500 casualties yesterday alone, a high proportion being combat soldiers." I lowered my binoculars, my expression calm rather than joyful. Harold's final reserves have been gutted. He's trapped. If he attacks, his men have no courage or gunpowder left. If he retreats, he returns to Flossgard having achieved nothing, facing the wrath of his disgruntled legion commanders. I turned, leaning against the cold stone wall, watching the city's streets stir to life. He wants to run, but fears the shame. Tell Leon's dragoons and the Northern Iron Cavalry to remain at high alert. The moment Harold moves, his vulnerability will be exposed. I visited the infirmaries, where the wounded from the rearguard actions were being treated. The air in the stone buildings was thick with herbs, blood, and alcohol, punctuated by the groans of the injured. I was surprised to find a familiar figure inside the main infirmary. Charlotte, dressed in a simple blue wool dress and linen apron, had her golden hair tied back neatly. She and a dozen women moved among the wounded, distributing clean bandages, warm herbal soup, and disinfectant ointment. Charlotte worked with earnest care, kneeling beside a young soldier who had lost his left arm to wipe his brow and check on him. She listened intently to his weak whispers, then gently fed him a spoonful of soup. In the morning light, her focus gave her a warm, radiant aura. The conscious soldiers watched her with captivated eyes. Her presence seemed to soothe their pain, and those who tried to sit up were gently restrained by her companions. I recognized the look in the soldiers' eyes, a desperate hunger for hope. To them, Charlotte was more inspiring than any speech. I watched from the shadows until Charlotte finished and joined me for a walk back to the castle. The city was alert but calmer, the tension eased by yesterday's victory. Auxiliaries cleared wheel ruts, women carried water, and children peeked from corners. Near the north gate, they encountered a weary unit of the 4th Battalion returning from patrol. Though exhausted and soot-stained, the soldiers' eyes still burned with the excitement of battle. "Keep your spirits up. Sing," their young officer commanded. The men sang a rhythmic, rugged marching song about duty and defending their home. I and Charlotte stepped aside to let them pass. The soldiers sang louder and marched with renewed vigor upon seeing their lord and lady. Many soldiers were mesmerized by Charlotte, whose gentle smile seemed to purify their battle-hardened hearts. A few men were so distracted they nearly stumbled into their comrades. "Eyes front, you fools," the officer barked, swatting them with his scabbard. Charlotte giggled, a sound like melting snow, causing the scolded soldiers to blush and march with stiff, awkward steps. I chuckled. "It seems your presence boosts morale more than double pay." Charlotte blushed and shot me a playful look. The aroma of meat broth and fresh bread wafted from the cooking stations, stirring everyone's hunger. We grabbed 2 loaves of bread. "I wanted to help, so I gathered some women to assist at the infirmary," Charlotte said tentatively. "I hope you don't think I'm overstepping." I looked at her with warmth. "Not at all. You've done a wonderful thing. The men are heartened by your presence." "Relieved?" Charlotte asked. "I've heard the officers whispering that Harold is finished. Are you planning a counterattack?" I nodded. "He is at his weakest. I intend to strike when he attempts to retreat. My cavalry will strike like a hammer. I want to pursue him until he fears the name of Conford for a decade. With you managing the rear, I can focus entirely on the front," I added. Charlotte looked at me with admiration. "Thank you for trusting me." "You are my wife," I replied solemnly. "Who else would I trust?" Moved, Charlotte hesitated before speaking again, her tone thoughtful. "Carl, I don't know if I should say this." "Go ahead. Since the Solonians are crippled, do we need to push them so hard? Perhaps letting them escape would be better. It might make the Plantagenet royal family value Conford more." She was suggesting they keep the enemy alive to maintain their own strategic importance. This sentiment was shared by many in the general staff. From a purely strategic standpoint, Harold would be unable to organize another major offensive for years. Conford could instead focus on uniting with Count Rochefort and Duke Schmidt to gradually erode Solon's influence. Harold is doomed regardless. A weakened, hostile Solon is exactly what Conford needs to remain indispensable to the royal center. This prevents the tragedy of being discarded once the threat is gone, buying Conford time and political leverage. It is a profound political strategy. Charlotte's ability to see and voice this proves her intellect surpasses most nobles and male commanders. She is planning for the future of Conford beyond mere logistics. I continued eating my pancake, staring at the street. I neither agreed nor disagreed. Sensing my silence, Charlotte added nervously. Just a thought. You are the Lord. You know warfare best. Ignore it if you disagree. After walking in silence, I said calmly, I don't blame you. Thinking of the long term shows you truly consider this home. I stopped and looked at her seriously, but Solon is still strong. Despite their losses, their core force remains. In open field combat, we aren't guaranteed a win. We must not underestimate their cavalry. As for nurturing enemies, it's not the only path. We have a blood feud. I executed their envoy. There is no room for compromise. Conford's future cannot depend on an external enemy. True security comes from our own strength, fortifications, elite troops, prosperity, and unity. It also comes from strategic planning, military, political, economic, and dynastic. I glanced at her meaningfully, implying that alliances with the Rockefort and Schmidt families are more stable foundations than keeping an enemy alive. Let's win this battle first, I concluded. Crush Harold so he feels the pain. Only then can we plan a future that doesn't rely on outsiders. Charlotte's unease turned into deep understanding and admiration. She nodded and took my arm, a gesture both shy and natural. I understand, she said firmly. Go prepare the counterattack. I'll handle the rear. Sunset bathed the residential area outside the Tunbeo East Gate in orange. Albert walked home slowly, carrying a bag of documents and bread, his pace weary. His home was a modest two-story stone house assigned to officials. Though simpler than his life in the royal capital, it was a sanctuary after his recent hardships. He had carefully tended the small yard. He was no longer the royal steward. I was beyond anyone's control now. I gave him a minor, easy job, which Albert accepted, though he missed his family. He unlocked the heavy oak door, greeted by the scent of old books and wax. He hung up his coat, intending to prepare a simple dinner, but froze upon seeing the living room. The room was dim, but someone was sitting in his armchair. The man sat with his back to the door, relaxed, as if he owned the place. He turned around, a nondescript man in his 30s wearing a well-tailored gray coat. His expression was calm, but his eyes were sharp and predatory. Albert felt a chill run down his spine. He stepped back, voice trembling. Who are you? How did you get in? The man stood smoothly, bowed, and said calmly, Good evening, Mr. Albert. Forgive the intrusion. I am Calais. Albert searched his memory. He didn't recognize the name or face. Was he a spy sent by me? Seeing Albert's confusion, Calais pulled a black velvet-wrapped object from his coat. He revealed a badge, dark gold, featuring an iris relief and intricate royal patterns. The Plantagenet Royal Iris. Albert's breath hitched. He knew it well from his time serving Princess Louise. Why would this man have it? Calais watched Albert's reaction. He put the badge away and said coldly, You don't need to know who I work for. Just know two things. I have a mission, and you will assist me. Albert's throat went dry. What do you want? This is Conford, Lord Carl's territory. Calais stepped closer, locking eyes with him, and delivered the chilling command. Albert, the Empress has decreed. I am ordered to assassinate Princess Louise. You will provide all necessary assistance. Before Solon could recover from their assault, Conford's counterattack struck. I would give them no respite. At dawn, red banners rose across Conford, and the drums of war thundered through the mist. Lower the drawbridge. Artillery, fire. The heavy ironclad drawbridges crashed down. Simultaneously, the cannons on the walls and bastions roared. Artillery fire shifted from precision strikes to a barrage, hammering the Solonians' newly occupied outer earthworks and their visible camp. Infantry, advance. Before the smoke cleared, Carnford infantry phalanxes surged from the city gates and across the drawbridge in disciplined formation. Organized by battalion and company, they struck the Solonian lines like three blades targeting weak points. Brendan led the left flank against the mountain junction. Roland's 2nd Battalion and Grenadiers assaulted the center. Leon's dismounted dragoons, supported by naval fire, attacked the coastal right flank. This fierce counter-assault shattered Harold's plan for an orderly retreat. Instead of cowering, the Carnford forces attacked. Harold realized that retreating now would cause his entire line to collapse. Hold the line. Move the cavalry reserve. Harold ordered, his heart sinking as he realized the initiative had shifted to me. This was no longer a siege, but a field battle where Carnford dictated the terms. Solonian troops, exhausted and demoralized, were forced into brutal close-quarters combat within the trenches and breastworks. Fresh and high-spirited, the Carnford soldiers quickly overwhelmed the weary Solonians. The left flank, held by tribal auxiliaries, crumbled first under Brendan's assault and fire from the mountain bastion. A tactical withdrawal attempt by the left flank commander quickly devolved into a panicked rout. On the right, Leon's forces pushed forward, relentlessly harassed by naval artillery. Carnford detachments acted like parasites, clinging to the retreating Solonian rear guard. These mobile units struck vulnerable flanks and tails, retreating before they could be engaged by the main force. Harassed constantly, the Solonian rear guard could neither stand nor flee effectively. After repeated skirmishes, the rear guard's morale broke, leading them to abandon supplies and wounded as they fled toward the main body. The psychological difference between a vanguard and a rear guard is stark. The former fights with hope, the latter with the despair of abandonment. This isolation proved fatal to Solonian morale. The collapse spread to the center, held by the demoralized musketeer guard. Hearing cries of "The Carnford are here," and "We're defeated," from the fleeing right flank, the center's resolve vanished. Roland seized the moment, ordering his forces to swarm the crumbling defenses. Artillery and fire arrows from the city added to the cacophony, deepening the Solonian panic. The musketeer guard, lacking orders, was quickly surrounded and isolated. Faced with bayonets and demands to surrender, these dispirited troops threw down their weapons en masse. Watching from afar, Harold felt only cold disgust. He abandoned any hope of rescuing them. Even Harold's elite units began to lose cohesion. Seeing the disaster, Ulf abandoned the center, leading his Sparrow Legion north without leaving a rear guard. His retreat was swift and selfish. Ulf's departure removed a critical pillar of the Solonian defense. Carnford forces poured through the resulting gap, sweeping the lines. Harold realized his orderly retreat had become a total avalanche of defeat. Thousands of Solonian soldiers and slaves fled north like a panicked swarm of ants. Weapons and armor were discarded to facilitate faster flight. Supplies, siege equipment, and medical stores were left behind as spoils for Carnford. Yet, my true killing blow was yet to come. A low, ominous cavalry horn echoed across the field. A black torrent of steel appeared on the eastern horizon. It was the Carnford main cavalry force, 900 strong, including the Northern Iron Cavalry and Leon's Dragoons. They advanced in a disciplined, three-line formation, acting like a moving wall. With lances leveled and sabers drawn, they moved with lethal, measured precision. Their officers adjusted the formation with expert control. Harold knew that a flank attack by organized cavalry during a rout meant total annihilation. "Sven," Harold roared, "take your men. Stop that cavalry at any cost." "Yes, your majesty," Sven replied instantly. He gathered 1,000 loyal cavalrymen and launched a desperate countercharge against the Carnford tide, hoping to buy time for the retreating army. 2 cavalry torrents surged across the wasteland. The Carnford cavalry accelerated, their thundering hooves raising clouds of dust as 3 lines charged towards Sven's Solonians. Knowing their retreat was blocked by their crumbling army, Sven's men let out savage war cries and charged head-on, disregarding casualties. Boom! Steel and flesh collided in a brutal clash. The disciplined Carnford cavalry, utilizing spears and sabers, pierced the Solon formation like a hot knife through butter. Despite the chaos, Sven's troops remained resilient. They broke into small squads, relentlessly harassing and entangling the Carnford riders from the flanks and rear. They used superior individual horsemanship to pin down their opponents, preventing them from regrouping for a decisive charge against the main retreating force. The battle devolved into a chaotic vortex of skirmishes. Carnford launched 4 fierce charges, yet could not shake off the persistent Solonian harassment. When Harold sent a 1,000-strong reserve to support Sven, Carnford commander Kalen signaled a retreat. Woo! Carnford cavalry disengaged and withdrew in good order. While they failed to crush the main retreat, they successfully exhausted Harold's elite mobile forces. Bang! Bang bang! As the cavalry withdrew, The heavy cannons atop Conford Castle fired 2 rapid volleys at the regrouping Solonians. 3 shells struck the dense formation, causing massive carnage. The survivors fell into a panic, trampling one another and rendering them unable to mount a counterattack. From the walls, I observed the engagement through my telescope, lowering it only after my men safely retreated and the artillery struck true. "Record this," I told my staff calmly. Even in total retreat, the Solonians maintain fierce resilience and tactical cohesion in cavalry combat. This differs from our siege experience. In open field combat, we lack an overwhelming advantage. Without the artillery, this would have been far bloodier. The young staff officers nodded, their previous arrogance regarding the Solonians replaced by newfound caution. Today's skirmish served as a wake-up call. The Solon army's core strength was genuine. Their current defeat stemmed from logistical failure and shattered morale, not inherent weakness. Brendan stepped forward, eyeing the retreating Solonians. "Shall we deploy all reserves, including the Fran City cavalry, to crush Harold's center while they are in disarray?" I pondered, then shook my head. "No, Brendan. Never underestimate a fox like Harold. He hasn't lost control. Sven's men are still fighting. He likely holds his Wolf Legion in reserve. If we commit everything, we risk walking into an ambush." Tapping the stone wall, I continued, "Our goal isn't a high-stakes gamble. It is to bleed him dry until he can never recover." I turned to my officers. "Order the entire army. From now until they reach Flossgard, our pursuit and harassment shall not cease for a single moment. Infantry will form pursuit detachments to strike their rear and flanks. We don't need total annihilation. We need to keep them bleeding and unable to rest. Cavalry will be directed by Kalen and Leon to raid supply lines and intercept messengers. Avoid head-on clashes. Focus on chaos and delay. Artillery will move forward to support the infantry, with heavy guns providing constant cover. We are a patient wolf pack, not an impulsive tiger. We will tear them apart piece by piece so that they return not as an army, but as a broken, terrified rabble. This pursuit will define the northern frontier for the next decade. I want not just a victory, but an era of peace and an unshakable Conford." "Yes, my lord," the officers roared, their eyes burning with resolve. Night fell, shrouding the wilderness outside Conford in ink-black darkness. In the section of the outer earth wall now held by Conford, shadows gathered in silence. Following my orders, 15 night raid squads prepared to strike the retreating Solonians like vipers. Roderick checked his squad's gear: flintlock hammers, bayonets, grenades, knives, and white identification strips. A newly promoted captain, Roderick had performed well in the day's pursuit, capturing a group of stragglers. Despite his impending promotion to battalion commander, he remained anxious. The day's combat had left him wary of the Solonians' tenacity in the field. Once away from the walls, their ferocity far exceeded his expectations. Attacking a massive, alert enemy camp with only 100 men felt like throwing eggs at a stone. However, the mission details soon clarified the true intent. They weren't meant to storm the camp, but to eliminate sentries and sow panic, ensuring the Solonians remained in a state of constant, nerve-wracking terror. It was psychological warfare, a slow, dull blade cutting into the enemy. As he briefed his platoon leaders, a strange group of 20 soldiers approached. They wore dark engineer uniforms and carried unusual equipment. They bore no standard weapons, instead carrying long, heavy, oilcloth-wrapped bundles. The objects were 2 to 3 meters long and thick as a man's thigh, hitting the ground with a heavy thud. Roderick watched curiously, wondering if they were oversized spears or some specialized siege equipment. An engineer officer briefed Roderick. His company was to escort a special engineering squad to a designated position and protect their operation. Roderick grumbled, but immediately ordered his men to prepare. A sharp, owl-like whistle signaled the start. Roderick signaled his 200 elite soldiers to move out silently into the dark wilderness, followed by 20 engineers carrying extra-long spears. The wilderness was filled with ambient noise. Roderick deployed experienced scouts as the unit advanced in a loose formation. Due to the Solonians' disorganized state, they encountered only 3 small patrols. These scouts fled in terror after firing useless signal arrows. A platoon leader asked if they should pursue. Roderick refused, prioritizing their mission over the scouts. They reached an open area roughly 2 kilometers from the Solon camp. The engineer officer ordered a halt and immediately began the operation. They unveiled the extra-long spears, thick wooden poles equipped with metal components and fuses. The engineers dug several pits into the frozen ground. They assembled foldable wooden tripods, securing them firmly into the pits. The spears were mounted onto the tripods, angled toward the Solon camp. Roderick and his men watched with curiosity. Roderick remained skeptical of the weapon's purpose. He wondered if they were oversized ballistae or the rumored fire arrows from the east. He doubted they could hit a target 2 kilometers away, as even Conford's best field artillery struggled at half that distance. The engineer officer urgently ordered everyone to take cover. Roderick and his men scattered, crouching behind earthworks. Engineers ignited the thick fuses, which sparked brightly in the dark. The engineers scrambled for cover, covering their ears. Silence hung in the air until the moment of ignition. A loud hiss erupted. The spears roared to life, emitting blinding orange flames and massive recoil as they launched into the sky with a piercing shriek. They streaked across the night sky in a lethal arc toward the distant Solon camp. More followed in quick succession. The barrage continued. A meteor shower of fire rained down upon the unsuspecting Solon soldiers. Watching the spectacle, Roderick's skepticism vanished. He wondered what other monsters Hector's workshop had created. Distant screams and explosions erupted from the Solon camp. For 2 nights, these fire arrows kept the Solonians in a state of terror and chaos. Just as Conford's officers planned their final pursuit, the northern frontier's winter struck. The sky turned a menacing leaden gray before dawn. The wind died down, signaling a coming storm. By noon, a massive blizzard reduced visibility to under 10 meters. The temperature plummeted as the storm intensified. The blizzard shattered Conford's pursuit plans. I stood on the wall, shivering despite my heavy cloak. I tried to use my telescope, but the lens fogged, and the view was obscured by white snow. I cursed and lowered the telescope. I felt the tension among my senior officers, who had spent days perfecting their strategy. Their detailed plans for cavalry and infantry maneuvers were now useless. Snow piled up on me, Brendan, and Roland, coating us in white. They stood in silence, watching the chaotic storm. The blizzard posed a lethal challenge to any army. The cold sapped strength, while the snow made movement and communication nearly impossible. Dampened powder or softened bowstrings can trigger panic, causing a unit to lose control or collapse entirely. I was more wary of Harold, the king of Solon, whose tactical sharpness had been proven in previous engagements. I feared that if I pursued blindly into the blizzard, I might fall into one of Harold's traps, forfeiting all previous advantages. The momentum of the war could shift in an instant. Woo-woo. As I weighed my options, a horn sounded from deep within the blizzard, a signal from the Conford scouts. The Solonians are moving. Harold was indeed using the storm to cover a large-scale troop movement. I felt the pressure. The opportunity was there, but the blizzard was an impenetrable barrier. The general staff's plan was to wait for the Solonians to overextend during a retreat, then have the cavalry strike the flanks while infantry secured the breakthrough. Now, the storm blinded them. They could not distinguish between a full retreat, a feint, or an ambush, nor could they effectively command their own forces. "My lord," Brendan whispered, "the scouts confirm movement. Should we send the cavalry to engage?" Roland looked at me, his eyes burning with battle lust, though tempered by caution. I bit my lip, my logic battling my instinct. Ultimately, I chose restraint. "No," I said. "The risk is too high. We cannot stake our victory on Harold's potential mistakes." I issued a compromise. Form reinforced scout companies from our most experienced men. Move out in multiple directions to identify the Solonians' true intentions, locate their main force, and harass their retreat. Avoid major engagements. If you encounter their main body, retreat immediately. The main force and cavalry will remain on standby behind the earth walls. Wait for the storm to clear or for intelligence to return. Tell the captains, survival and information are the true objectives. The orders were relayed, and the elite scout companies vanished into the white chaos. Roderick pulled his scarf tight, his eyes sharp and alert. Leading his company, he moved cautiously through the near-zero visibility of the storm. The world was a white void, filled only by the howling wind and the crunch of snow underfoot. They moved in a loose column, maintaining contact through vague silhouettes and whispered commands, weapons gripped tight, nerves frayed by the unknown. Roderick kept his men quiet, agreeing with the Lord's caution. This weather made even walking a hazard. Their mission was reconnaissance, not a death wish. Suddenly, 10 paces ahead, a blurred shadow emerged from the snow, a hunched figure peering into the gloom. Roderick's heart hammered. He instinctively raised his flintlock musket, finger on the trigger, but hesitated at the last second. What if it was a friendly scout? The shadow also froze, clearly caught in the same moment of uncertainty. For 2 seconds, they stared at each other through the swirling snow, until more shadows appeared behind the stranger. Place. Roderick shouted the password. The response was the sudden raising of various weapons, glinting in the snow light. Fire. Roderick roared, pulling his trigger instantly. Bang. His shot acted as a signal. His tense musketeers fired into the moving shadows. Bang, 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 bang. The gunfire erupted, sharp and jarring against the howling wind, as white smoke mingled with the snow. Arg! Ugh! Screams erupted from the shadows. 7 or 8 figures collapsed, staining the snow red. The desperate volley had found its mark. Throw! The Solonians were veterans. Despite the losses, they didn't break. They immediately retaliated with flying axes, heavy spears, and maces, hurling them toward the musketeers' positions. Squelch! Crack! Arg! Screams rose from Roderick's company, igniting the primal urge for slaughter. Drop the muskets! Melee! Charge! Roderick threw his empty weapon, drew his rapier, and let out a bestial roar, charging into the chaos. His men followed, abandoning their muskets to draw blades and spears, screaming as they slammed into the enemy. The Solonians met them head-on, snarling as they swung scimitars, battle axes, and maces. The blizzard obscured their faces, leaving only the sight of savage figures and flashing steel. The snowfield became a bloody, chaotic hell. Both sides fought with desperate intensity, the Conford men fueled by momentum, the Solonians by the ferocity of cornered beasts. Without formation or command, the battle devolved into a primal brawl. Soldiers fought in small groups or one-on-one. A Conford soldier stabbed a Solonian, only to be felled by a battle axe. A Solonian parried a spear with a shield, only to be run through from behind. Men grappled in the snow, biting and choking each other until one stopped breathing. In standard warfare, soldiers rely on ranks and officers. Here, in this frozen arena, every man fought for himself, and every strike decided life or death. Enemies here. That's our man. Attack the other side. More shouts and footsteps emerged from the fog. The sound of the initial clash had acted as a beacon, drawing in nearby units. Other Conford scout companies and Solonian patrols converged from all directions. The skirmish snowballed into a chaotic, medium-scale melee. The engagement zone expanded, with figures clashing in the mist, all semblance of formation utterly lost. Soldiers on both sides fought blindly in the blizzard, driven by survival instincts. The battle devolved into a brutal, chaotic war of attrition. Blood stained the snow as men fell constantly. Both sides fought with desperate, lethal intensity. Retreat was impossible. Breaking contact meant risking a collapse. They had to fight until one side broke or the storm forced a separation. Roderick, despite a shoulder wound, fought like a madman, stabbing 2 enemies. Gasping, he saw only blurred figures and blood-flecked snow. Trapped in the blizzard's death spiral, he prayed for either Conford reinforcements or for the storm to end. 200 paces away, the storm obscured another force. Harold, surrounded by elite guards, rode north, his face pale and frozen with exhaustion. He burned abandoned supplies to create smoke screens, hoping to delay pursuers. What is happening? He had planned an orderly withdrawal, but the blizzard offered a chance to strike back. He feigned a retreat to lure me into a trap, intending to crush the pursuing Conford army with hidden elites. In the chaotic melee, the The Solon warrior's ferocity would overcome Carnford's firearm advantage. Before his ambush was set, heavy gunfire and screams erupted on his right flank. The blizzard amplified the sounds, making it seem like a massive engagement. Panicked soldiers fled toward him, screaming that my main force had ambushed them. Harold's heart sank. He couldn't verify if I had outmaneuvered him or if the chaos was contagious. He abandoned the ambush, fearing his small force would be encircled. On the Carnford walls, I and my generals watched the Solon camp burn. "They're burning their camp. They're fleeing," an officer shouted. Brendan and Roland urged me to launch a full-scale pursuit. I, peering through my telescope at the chaotic, fire-lit snow, remained silent. I wrestled with my decision. A glory-seeking general would charge, but I held a greater burden. As Lord of Carnford and heir to the Schmidt family, I had to protect my people. I had already won a decisive victory. Harold's invasion was shattered. He was retreating in disgrace. The Solonians would not be able to invade for years. My strategic goals were met. The risk of a reckless pursuit was too high. If I charged into the blizzard and fell into a trap, I would squander my hard-won victory. "Hold positions," I ordered calmly. "Monitor their retreat. We wait for the storm to clear." I chose the prudent path to secure my victory. I would pursue only when the situation was controlled. By afternoon, the storm eased and visibility improved. Reports confirmed the Solonians were in a disorganized retreat, leaving supplies behind. The time had come. Kalen, Leon, take the cavalry. Harass the rear guard. Slow them down, but avoid head-on clashes with organized lines. Brendan, Roland, follow with the infantry to secure spoils and captured cannons. 5,000 Carnford cavalry surged out like wolves, targeting the stragglers. This relentless harassment crippled the Solon army's retreat speed. Dragoons advance. Provide fire support. Leon's dragoons showcased their mobility. They rode within range, dismounted, and unleashed disciplined volleys from their flintlock muskets. Their superior range decimated the Solon rearguard. Their fire broke the enemy lines, setting the stage for heavy cavalry charges. Harold was furious and terrified by these bleeding tactics. Realizing his army would be devoured, he personally led the rear guard to organize desperate defensive lines. At midnight, a camp panic erupted in Liao's camp. Soldiers turned on each other in a frenzy of paranoia and resentment. The musketeer guard was completely wiped out in the slaughter. The following days became a death march for the Solonians. Carnford's pursuit was relentless, forcing the Solonians to abandon more men and supplies as they fled toward the northern river. Having lost thousands more, the Solonians finally reached the river, desperate to escape Carnford's reach. The final test arrived. The narrow ferry crossing and makeshift pontoon bridge meant the army's retreat would be slow. A rearguard was essential to hold off pursuers. This sacrificial mission fell to Luoyao, whom Harold had effectively abandoned. Seeking redemption or perhaps a final shred of military dignity, Luoyao led his remaining hundreds of loyalists to fortify the southern bank, resolved to fight to the death. Their resolve was unexpectedly firm. When Carnford's vanguard cavalry attempted a swift capture of the crossing, they were repelled by a precise volley from Luoyao's men. Carnford's dragoons dismounted to engage in a firefight. Across 100 paces, both sides exchanged flintlock musket fire, leaving casualties on both sides amidst the smoke. Driven by a death wish, Luoyao's men held their ground, buying precious time for Harold's main force to cross. The resistance only collapsed when Carnford's main infantry arrived with light cannons, overwhelming Luoyao's position with superior firepower. Luoyao died in battle, and none of his men surrendered. This final stand, while tragic, could not alter the outcome of the rout. A month ago, the 100,000-strong Solon army had been invincible. Now, only tens of thousands of shattered, demoralized remnants fled back to Flossgard. While the strategic lines returned to their pre-war state, the balance of power had shifted drastically. The Solon army paid a heavy price for this campaign. They lost 7,000 elite troops, 5,000 auxiliary soldiers, and over 13,000 camp slaves. Luoyao's unit was annihilated. Furthermore, they lost 2,000 horses, 1,200 pack animals, all their cannons, and vast quantities of supplies and tents. In contrast, Carnford lost 2,100 dead and 3,000 wounded, but gained 15,000 battle-hardened veterans. With refugees continuously flowing into my territory, I could mass-produce fresh recruits. Combined with my veterans, a formidable army was taking shape. The success of this vision, however, depended on my ability to secure the immense wealth and grain required to sustain such a force. The 2-month Battle of Carnford concluded as the Solon army fled north and reports of pursuit from Flossgard grew sparse. Through a miraculous defensive victory, Carnford announced its rise and inviolability to the northern frontier and the Plantagenet kingdom. The city was still basking in the relief of survival. Markets buzzed with vendors, taverns were packed with soldiers boasting of their deeds, and the Amber Bay docks resumed trade, welcoming merchants, immigrants, and envoys. Commendations and casualty lists were posted on the streets, drawing crowds of grieving and rejoicing citizens. The victory brought a new sense of unity and pride to every Carnford person. Only the radical officers lamented the blizzard that cut short the final pursuit. Had the weather held, they might have trapped Harold's main force and achieved a more decisive annihilation. Yet, this regret was soon eclipsed by the scale of their victory. Elite cavalry units pursued the enemy to the outskirts of Flossgard, and the panic of the Solon court became a common joke in the north. I presided over a grand memorial for the fallen and a victory parade. At the new memorial cemetery, I personally laid the first soil on each grave and delivered a somber, stirring eulogy. Families of the fallen received generous pensions, and the wounded were given the best care. A grand awards ceremony followed in the central square. Brendan, Roland, Leon, and Kalen received medals, land, and promotions. Roderick and other officers were elevated, and countless soldiers were honored. Hector's Ordnance Bureau, Edgar's logistics team, and Charlotte's nursing corps were publicly commended, cementing morale and order. Exhausted by days of ceremonies, I longed for rest and time with my family, but peace was short-lived. The day after the memorial, Richter approached me in my study with urgent news. "My lord," Richter said, handing over a sealed note. "Our informant in the royal capital of Place sent this via the highest-level emergency channel." I opened the note and decoded the rushed, cryptic message. My expression darkened as I read. "How reliable is this?" I asked, tapping the desk. "It is a single-source report, but the informant is a veteran with a perfect record. He risked everything to send this, so we must treat it as absolute truth," Richter replied. I leaned back, closing my eyes to process the grim news. Even I was shaken. An assassination plot against Princess Louise, likely orchestrated by the Queen Mother herself, potentially using her mysterious lover Victor, a man rumored to be linked to dangerous underground mages. I quickly grasped the political logic behind the move. The Queen Mother was playing a dangerous game of power. Seeing me not only survive but thrive and become a potential uncrowned king of the North, Katerina could no longer tolerate my rise. Conford's strength had exceeded her control. If the princess were assassinated, the Queen Mother could frame the brutal Solon remnants, disgruntled Carnford radicals, or even me, using the tragedy to smear my reputation and incite the nobility against me. And in the chaos, I realized, the blade could easily turn toward me, Charlotte, or Klein. "I advise immediate maximum security," Richter urged. "We must tighten protection around you, Lady Charlotte, Lady Isabella, and the young master. Every stranger must be vetted, and all food and water strictly tested." I nodded. "Handle it. Draw whatever manpower you need from the Royal Guard." Richter hesitated before adding, "There is one more issue, the princess's current location." I waited for him to continue. "Princess Louise is living alone in the Amber Bay Villa. It is beautiful, but too far from the castle and poorly defended." Richter argued that the Amber Bay Villa district is too complex for the Intelligence Bureau to secure. If a professional assassin like Victor were to strike there, their chances of success and escape would be significantly higher. I grasped the implication. "You mean I should move her out of Amber Bay?" "Yes, my lord. For the princess's absolute safety and our defensive efficiency, she should be relocated to the most secure core area. For instance, the underground shelter of the Carnford Border Bank. It is centrally located, heavily guarded, and allows our bureau to maintain an impenetrable defense." I stared at Richter as if he had lost his mind. "Richter, I said with a sense of absurdity. You want Charlotte and Louise to live under the same roof? Do you think that's possible? The thought of my current wife, the woman I sacrificed my royal marriage to be with, living alongside my former wife, the princess, was enough to give me a migraine. Richter remained serious, insisting, "This is not a joke, but a matter of security. Against a mage or assassin of Victor's caliber, splitting our forces creates vulnerabilities. Concentrating all high-value targets in one fortified location is the only optimal solution." He proposed housing me, Charlotte, Lady Isabella, Princess Louise, and the young heir together in the bank's shelter, noting it had sufficient space for separate quarters. Your personal guard and the Intelligence Bureau can then focus all resources on one point. Any personal inconvenience must take a back seat to survival. I fell silent, acknowledging the tactical validity of Richter's plan. Charlotte, Klein, and Lady Isabella were vital to me, and Princess Louise was my responsibility. I could not allow her to be harmed on my land, lest the Queen Mother find a pretext to attack me. Still, the domestic fallout promised to be incredibly thorny. Finally, I sighed. You're right, safety first. But I won't force this. I will explain the situation to the princess and let her decide. She is not my prisoner. That afternoon, I rode to the Amber Bay Villa. The princess's white residence sat on a secluded headland overlooking the sea. A flustered maid greeted me. "My lord, the princess is not inside." "Where is she?" I asked. "She went for a walk by the sea to fish through the ice," the maid replied cautiously. "No need to announce me," I said. "I'll go to her." Leaving my guards behind, I walked down the path toward the beach. The winter coast of Amber Bay was bleak and vast, with thick, greenish-white ice covering the water and a biting, salty wind blowing in. I soon spotted a small group of attendants gathered around an ice hole. Princess Louise, wrapped in a dark blue velvet cloak with silver fox fur, stood with her hood down, her long black hair neatly styled. She leaned over the hole, her cheeks flushed from the cold, her eyes bright with childlike curiosity. "Got one. Your Highness, there's a bite," a guard whispered excitedly. Louise held her breath, watching as a shimmering fish was pulled from the ice. She clapped her hands, laughing genuinely. Seeing her stripped of royal pretense, I felt she looked happier here in the northern frontier than I had ever seen her before. I approached, causing the guards to turn sharply. Upon seeing me, they saluted and relaxed. Louise turned, her smile fading into a polite, composed expression. She curtsied. "Lord Carl, good day. What brings you here?" "Your Highness," I said, "I need to speak with you. Could we step aside?" Louise nodded, gave instructions to her attendants, and followed me along the shoreline, keeping their guards at a distance. The wind whipped their cloaks as they walked. I stopped and turned to face her. "Louise," I said, my tone grave, "what I am about to say may shock you. Please, stay calm and hear me out." Louise gripped her cloak, her expression turning to one of unease. I looked her in the eye. "I have received reliable intelligence from the royal capital. A professional assassin has infiltrated Carnford. Their target is you." Louise gasped. "An assassin? Me?" Her voice trembled as she scanned the empty, frozen beach, now feeling like a death trap. "Why? Who? The Solonians? Or?" She wondered, her mind racing through political enemies. I chose not to name Queen Mother Katerina. To tell Louise that her own stepmother wanted her dead would be a cruel blow to the last of her familial illusions. Some darkness, I decided, was better left for me to shoulder alone. "We are still investigating the source," I said steadily. "But for your safety, you must leave this villa immediately." Louise nodded, her eyes filled with trust. "I understand, Carl. I will follow your arrangements." "To the castle?" "No," I shook my head. "To the underground shelter of the Carnford Border Bank. It is the most secure location in the city." "The bank? Underground?" Louise paused, then accepted the logic. "Very well. When do I move?" "Now?" "But Louise, there is a complication." Louise looked at me, waiting. I hesitated before continuing. "To maximize security, you will not be alone. Charlotte, my wife, her mother Lady Isabella, and my son Klein will also be staying there." Louise froze, her initial confusion replaced by a flush of embarrassment that reached her ears. Living under the same roof as me was already nerve-wracking. Now she had to coexist with my wife, mother-in-law, and infant son. It was a suffocating prospect. She envisioned cold stares at the table, hushed whispers in the halls, and the innocent but stinging questions of a child, all while she remained an awkward outsider. Was this truly safe? The psychological pressure felt more stifling than any assassin. Seeing her hesitation, I offered gently, "If this is too uncomfortable, we can find a separate, secure place near the bank, though protection will be thinner. The choice is yours. Your comfort and safety matter." Louise stared at the dirty ice by her boots, struggling internally. Logic dictated that centralized protection was the optimal security solution. Emotionally, she dreaded the environment. Yet, looking at me, exhausted from battle and burdened by threats, she couldn't bear to make me split my focus on a more complex, vulnerable plan. "No," Louise said, steadying her voice. "Let's stick to the plan. Centralized protection is safer." "I'm fine." She attempted a smile, though it looked forced. I felt a complex pang. "Thank you. I'll explain to Charlotte. She's kind and reasonable, not petty. You'll get along." Louise nodded, though she remained skeptical. Could any woman truly be indifferent to her husband's ex-wife under the same roof? Suppressing her anxiety, she forced a smile. "I trust your judgment, Lord Carl." The operation was swift. I escorted Louise to the villa to pack her essentials. Her handmaidens and guards accompanied her, with security raised to the highest level. Protecting the princess took precedence over any concerns about alerting the enemy. The bank's underground shelter was hidden behind heavy iron doors and strict checkpoints. Louise was surprised by the space. It wasn't a dark cellar but a well-ventilated, comfortable area with soft lighting, thick carpets, and even a small indoor atrium with plants. They reached a cozy living area with a roaring fireplace. Charlotte sat on the rug, back to the entrance, focused on something. She wore a gray wool dress, her blonde hair glowing in the firelight. She was playing with her infant, Klein, who giggled and waved his arms. Lady Isabella sat nearby, reading, looking content. Hearing them, both women looked up. Charlotte smiled at me, then paused upon seeing Louise, her expression shifting to polite neutrality. I broke the silence. "Charlotte, mother, this is Princess Louise. Louise, this is my wife, Charlotte, and my mother-in-law, Lady Isabella." Charlotte handed Klein to the nanny, stood, and offered an elegant curtsy. "Good day, Your Highness. Welcome." Her voice was calm and clear. Louise returned the gesture with royal grace. "Good day, Lady Schmidt, Lady Isabella. My apologies for the intrusion." She studied Charlotte, the woman I called kind. Charlotte was beautiful, possessing a resilient, sunny air unlike the pale court ladies of Plantagenet. Most importantly, Charlotte's gaze held curiosity but no hostility, easing Louise's tension. I explained the situation. Charlotte listened intently, then nodded, looking at Louise with genuine concern. "Safety comes first," Charlotte said. "Please, make yourself at home. I'll show you the guest rooms. Pick whichever you like." Her manner was poised, neither overly familiar nor cold, perfectly balancing the role of a hostess. Louise's fears of being mistreated vanished. I had been right. "Thank you, Lady Schmidt," Louise replied, relaxing. "Call me Charlotte." She smiled, gesturing for Louise to follow. As they left, I exhaled, my shoulders finally dropping. The most volatile moment had passed smoothly. Charlotte had been perfect, and Louise had been polite. "Goo!" Klein cried out, reaching for his father with wide, sparkling eyes. My fatigue lifted as I took my son, who leaned into my chest, tugging at my buttons. Holding my son, the weight of conspiracies and social pressures seemed to fade. I nuzzled the baby's head, smelling the milk scent. Klein yawned, his lashes fluttering. I patted his back, my mind racing. I had won the war, but the shadow war behind the scenes was just beginning. It was a dangerous, silent battle. "Carl," Lady Isabella called out. I turned, walking to her chair with a respectful, concerned bow. "Yes, mother." Lady Isabella looked at me with a calm, gentle consideration, shedding her former cold scrutiny. After a pause, she said, "Carl, it is time." I looked at her, puzzled. She looked at the sleeping Klein in my arms and added softly, "We should officially name him Klein von Schmidt. Your son, a child of the Schmidt family." I was stunned, realizing the weight of her words. This was more than a name. It was a formal acceptance. She was acknowledging Klein as the rightful heir and me as her daughter's legitimate husband and a member of the family. The mother-in-law who once despised me had finally granted me her forgiveness and recognition. Choked with emotion, I replied, "Thank you, my lady. Truly, thank you." Lady Isabella smiled faintly. "You are better than I thought. At least this time, you didn't disappoint. Keep it up, Carl." This brief comment was the highest praise for me, confirming her approval of my protection of their family. "I will, my lady. I promise." Tired, Lady Isabella waved a hand. "I need to rest. Take Klein to his room. He shouldn't sleep here." Understood. Guided by a maid, I carried Klein to the nursery. The room was small but cozy, featuring a central crib. I tucked Klein in, who shifted slightly before falling back into a deep, rhythmic sleep. I stood by the bed, watching my son. The boy was now officially Klein von Schmidt, filling me with a new sense of responsibility. "My lord, I can watch the young master." "You should go," the maid whispered. I took one last look before quietly exiting. In the hallway, I passed a room where Charlotte and Louise were talking. Driven by curiosity and concern, I paused to listen. Charlotte said, "It's not as spacious as your villa in Amber Bay, but it's safe. When I first moved in, I felt buried." Louise replied with a wry smile, "It is safe. The walls are thick. I just don't know how long we'll be here." She hesitated, searching for the right words to describe their protected confinement. Charlotte chuckled. "Like prisoners, right?" Louise laughed, relieved. "Exactly. Safe prisoners." Their laughter eased the tension, and I realized their interaction was going better than expected. Charlotte noticed me at the door. "Carl," she teased, "eavesdropping on ladies is quite rude." I laughed awkwardly. "I was just passing by, checking if you were settled." Charlotte took my arm and turned to Louise. "Your Highness, we'll leave you to rest. If you need anything, just ask the maids. We'll dine together tonight." Louise nodded. "Thank you, Mrs. Schmidt. See you tonight." "Call me Charlotte," she corrected, leading me out and closing the door. In the hall, Charlotte held my hand, asking, "Is Klein asleep?" "Yes, he's sound asleep," I replied, feeling at peace. "Good," Charlotte said, then asked, "What did my mother say to you?" I stopped and faced her. She said Klein can officially be called Klein von Schmidt. He is my son and a Schmidt. Charlotte beamed, her eyes sparkling. "Happy? But you know," she lifted her chin, "I am a true Mrs. Schmidt now, too." I pulled her into an embrace. "Yes, my Mrs. Schmidt. Always." Closing the heavy iron door to the shelter, I headed back to the surface. Domestic peace needed guarding, but external threats required action. Delaying only gave their enemies more time to strike. Richter appeared from the shadows, looking exhausted but sharp. "My lord." I nodded and headed toward my command room. Richter followed, flanked by Intelligence Bureau elites and my personal guards. They moved through the bank's corridors, their footsteps echoing. Unless the attacker was a knight like Friedrich, breaching this defense was impossible. "Report," I said. "Living underground isn't a long-term solution. We must eliminate the threat." "Yes, my lord," Richter replied. "The Intelligence Bureau is at maximum alert. Our sole mission is to root out the mole in Conford and stop the assassination plot. We have tightened security on all entry points and are cross-referencing the backgrounds of all recent arrivals. The city is under secret investigation for suspicious gatherings, unusual rentals, and procurement of chemicals or metals. Protection for you, Lady Charlotte, Lady Isabella, the princess, and the young master is now encrypted and layered, with triple independent food and water testing in place. All servants and guards near core areas are undergoing renewed loyalty screenings." I nodded without stopping. "Good. But time is short. The enemy is professional. We must bait them or apply pressure at the source." They entered the command room, where a massive map of the northern frontier lay on a table. I stood by the window, looking over Conford, and addressed a long-standing concern. "Richter, we must extract Henry de Rochefort from the royal capital." "As you command, my lord." "Henry is the Count's son and Charlotte's brother," I said. "The assassination attempt on the princess has effectively torn the veil between the Empress Dowager and me. Henry is the Empress Dowager's primary hostage. If we act again, his life will be in extreme danger. If he is harmed or fully controlled, he becomes a major liability for the Count and me." Richter frowned. Henry's status is too sensitive. He resides in the Rochefort estate in the royal capital under the Empress Dowager's constant surveillance. Extracting him is incredibly difficult. Failure would confirm charges of rebellion. Our intelligence bureau lacks the manpower for such a high-stakes rescue. I tapped the map it plays. I know, but we cannot wait until the blade is at his throat. We aren't without help. Someone in the capital can provide critical assistance. Who? My brother, Conrad von Schmidt. Young Master Conrad? Richter asked. The Academy of Arcane Arts tutor who avoids politics? I explained. His status as a bookish mage is his best cover. He has connections within the magic circles that standard intelligence networks cannot reach, and we have a good relationship. This concerns the interests of both the Rochefort and Schmidt families. He will help with cover, safe houses, or intelligence. Richter's doubts faded into contemplation. A mage tutor's identity was an excellent disguise. If Conrad assisted, the success rate would rise significantly. I understand, Richter said. I will draft 2 plans, one for the arrests in Conford and one for rescuing Henry. I will contact young Master Conrad through secure channels to gauge his willingness. Good. Prioritize Henry's safety while rooting out the spies in Conford. We must win on both fronts. At Albert's residence, a single light flickered in the study. Albert sat stiffly at his desk, hands clasped. Opposite him, Calais studied a detailed map of Conford. You say the princess has left the villa for an unknown location? Calais asked calmly. Yes, Albert stammered. Lord Carl went to Amber Bay yesterday, and she was moved under heavy guard. The Intelligence Bureau is everywhere. Albert lowered his voice. They decimated the Solonian spy network. Harold's army is under their constant watch. They must have sensed something. You should leave before Richter finds you. He is a devil. Albert's fear was genuine, mixed with a desperate plea for them to leave. He just wanted the nightmare to end. Calais looked at Albert's sweating face. Mr. Albert, let me correct you. Calais leaned in, projecting an aura of menace. It is not you. It is we. From the moment you opened this door, we were in the same boat. The Empress Dowager's orders are absolute. If we fail, do you think you can stay out of it? Your wife, your 10-year-old son, your elderly parents. How do you think the Empress Dowager will comfort them? Albert jumped up, his face deathly pale. You wouldn't. We would, and we must, Calais said. Forget running. How do we poison her? She must eat and drink. Albert collapsed back into his chair, drained. It's impossible, he rasped. The Intelligence Bureau has triple-layered testing for all food and water. Every step is monitored. Getting close is suicide. What about magic? Calais asked. Remote curses or arcane means. Albert gave a bitter laugh. Conford is full of mages. The Lord has connections, and Hector's Ordnance Bureau has rune and alchemy experts. We don't know her location or her magical defenses. Using magic would only expose us to immediate retaliation. Bad news, then. Calais sighed, though he seemed unsurprised. He glanced out the window. But the mission must be completed. This is our fate, Mr. Albert, and now, yours too. He put on his coat. I will contact you. Until then, keep your mouth shut and stay out of sight. Richter stood at the study door, looking back at Albert with a cold, meaningful gaze. For your family in the royal capital, and for yourself. Good night, Mr. Albert. Click. The door closed, and Richter's footsteps faded away, leaving silence behind. Albert sat alone with his lamp. Could he betray his former mistress, the princess, to whom he had sworn loyalty? Despite his life in Conford under Lord I, the bond to his old master remained deeply ingrained. The Queen Mother was now plotting against the princess, viewing her as a threat to royal authority due to Lord I's rise in the northern frontier. Albert, once a respectable servant of the crown, now felt trapped in a dirty conspiracy that endangered his family. As he neared a breakdown, a rhythmic knocking broke the silence. Knock, knock, knock. Albert jumped, his heart racing. Was it Richter returning? Who is it? He asked, his voice hoarse. It's me, old John. A familiar, elderly voice replied. I saw your light was still on. Do you need anything? It was old John, his longtime servant from the capital. Albert felt a brief relief, followed by a sudden, chilling realization. In this sensitive moment, the servant's presence felt ominous. No, John. I'm going to sleep now, Albert said, trying to dismiss him. After a pause, the old man's tone shifted slightly. Are you sure, sir? Perhaps I should come in. There are things we should discuss. Albert's heart sank. Did old John know? Was he an agent of the Conford Intelligence Bureau? Trembling, he finally whispered, "Come in." The door creaked open. Old John entered, hunched over, carrying a candle. He placed the candle on the desk and looked Albert in the eye. "Mr. Albert, Director Richter sends his regards. He thanks you for your tip regarding the recent visitors." Albert's pupils constricted. Old John was indeed an agent. He had been under surveillance all along. "The director says that if you cooperate and stand on the right side, we will do our best to rescue your family in the capital," John said calmly. "It is a better chance than waiting for the Queen Mother to use them against you. As the princess's former steward, you know where your loyalty lies. Lord I offers her a sanctuary, whereas the Queen Mother treats her as a political pawn." These words broke Albert's resolve. While his family's safety was paramount, John offered a glimmer of hope and a path to redemption. He could not participate in the murder of the princess. Having observed Lord I's leadership and the order in Conford, he saw the potential of this territory. He felt a strong premonition that Conford could succeed. Aligning with Lord I might be the only way to save his family. After a long silence, he looked at the agent. "I am the princess's steward, and I will never betray her. Even if it costs me my family, that is my burden to bear." He felt drained, yet strangely at peace. He had chosen his conscience and staked his family's fate on Lord I. The agent nodded, "A wise choice. The princess will value your loyalty, and Lord I will not treat a loyal man poorly." He leaned in closer. "Now, tell me everything. Their plans, their hideouts, and their accomplices. You will also need to feed them information as we direct." Albert poured out everything he knew about Richter. The agent listened intently, coordinating their communication strategy and future responses. As the agent prepared to leave, Albert asked, "Is there really hope for my family?" The agent paused at the door. "We will try. Lord I has ordered a special rescue mission. You are no longer alone, Mr. Albert." The door clicked shut, leaving the study in silence. Lord I was awakened by his guards. Richter had arrived. Earlier that evening, Charlotte had hinted at them sharing a bed. I was thrilled, as our relationship had been slowly warming since the cliffside attack. However, I had declined, with a metaphorical dagger at my throat. I had no heart for romance. Richter entered, looking exhausted but sharp, clearly bearing important news. "My apologies for the late hour, my lord," Richter bowed. I rubbed my temples, shaking off my sleepiness. "It's fine. Have you found the mole?" "Correct," Richter confirmed. "Royal Steward Albert has defected and provided critical intelligence." I shook off my drowsiness. "Explain." "Albert's contact, a man using the alias Calais, operates via a secret signal, bird feathers placed in specific wall cracks. Calais then infiltrates Albert's residence at night. Calais is likely the primary coordinator for the assassination outside the royal capital." I mused. Albert has finally chosen a side. I must honor his cooperation. "How is the rescue plan for his family progressing?" "Underway," Richter replied. "Security around his family is lax compared to Henry's. This operation will also test the Queen Mother's vigilance." I nodded, satisfied. "What is your next move?" "We'll have Albert lure Calais into a trap tonight to capture him alive and dismantle his network." "Agreed," I commanded. "Execute it swiftly and silently. No mistakes, no alerts. Calais is dangerous. I am tired of Charlotte and the princess living like rats." A few days later, at sunset, a gray pigeon feather appeared in an old stone wall along the path to the residential district. It looked like debris, easily overlooked. To the right person, it was a beacon. At midnight, Calais arrived, blending into the shadows. He watched the dim light in Albert's study. Calais paused, eyes closed, whispering as a faint wave of magic scanned the residence. It was a basic detection spell. The result, calm. Only Albert was present, showing signs of anxiety. No traps or hidden threats. Calais smirked. The coward was clearly eager to report. He vaulted the wall and climbed the balcony like a gecko. He slipped through the cracked window into the study. Albert sat at his desk, back to the window, fidgeting with a cup. Hearing the noise, Albert spun around, looking terrified and subservient. Calais locked the window and approached. "You're eager, Albert. What news do you have?" He leaned in, pressing, "Where is the princess?" Albert trembled, his grip on the cup shaking. She is. Albert whispered. "Speak up," Calais demanded, his instincts suddenly flaring. Something was wrong. Albert's hand went limp. The cup shattered on the floor with a piercing crash. A signal. Calais' instincts screamed. He channeled magic for an emergency teleport. It was his trump card to escape to the street. But silver runes ignited on the walls and floor. A suppression field shattered his magic, cutting off the teleportation. Simultaneously, movement erupted. 5 shadows lunged from the corners. Calais barely registered their cold, focused eyes before the impact. Bang! A man tackled him, while another shattered his wrist to prevent spellcasting. 2 others pinned his arms, and a 5th dislocated his jaw. Ugh! Calais couldn't speak or chant. He was slammed face first into the floor, pinned by a knee to his back. The entire suppression took 2 seconds. It was a textbook, high-efficiency takedown. Albert slumped against the wall, gasping, watching his captor neutralized. Richter entered, nodding to his team. "Well done. Take him away. Albert, you've done well. Rest now." Calais was gagged, hooded, and carried out into the night. Interrogation began immediately. Calais underestimated Richter's methods. Under the interrogation of Richter's experts, combined with potions targeting mage physiology and psychological pressure, Calais will quickly shattered. Within hours, broken by physical limits and terror, Calais confessed everything he knew. The assassination was led by Victor, a mysterious confidant of the Queen Mother, who infiltrated the Northern Territory. Victor acted as a remote coordinator and magical support, avoiding direct contact during the reconnaissance phase. He was accompanied by several specialized mages and elite knights from the Royal Secret Forces. They infiltrated Confort in small groups, disguised as merchants, refugees, and adventurers. Calais served as Victor's direct link to the mole, Albert, responsible for verifying intelligence and coordinating the team. He revealed their temporary hideouts, emergency contact methods, and the disguises of his accomplices. Crucially, Victor possessed a remote monitoring method to sense the status of his operatives. Calais' prolonged silence would likely alert him. I received the report and immediately authorized arrests. The Confort Intelligence Bureau mobilized in the shadows. Using Calais' intel, the Bureau and Elite City Guard launched simultaneous raids across the city. Several hideouts and inns and warehouses were stormed, resulting in the capture of 7 mages and knights. The operation was swift and precise, utilizing anti-mage tactics with minimal friendly casualties. However, Victor remained missing, having left no trace at any of the sites. Captives revealed that Victor was hyper-cautious, never staying with them and communicating only via encrypted letters or one-way magic. Calais' capture had clearly spooked the snake, causing him to flee. I chose not to publicize the incident, as accusing the Queen Mother of assassinating a former princess would force an open conflict with the royal family. With the Northern Territory still recovering from the Selonian War, I needed time to build strength rather than trigger a political storm. I ordered the Intelligence Bureau to execute the captives secretly. With the threat neutralized, I felt the weight lift, stepping out of the oppressive Bureau headquarters into the crisp winter air. I ended the period of hiding for myself and my family. The underground shelter was closed. Charlotte, Lady Isabella, and Klein returned to the castle, and Princess Louise returned to her villa under heavy, reliable guard. The war's victory brought a surge of human resources to Confort. Refugees, border folk, adventurers, and defecting soldiers caused an explosive population growth. These people were the foundation for reconstruction and future military strength. Converting this population into power required time and money. Military expansion and infrastructure were draining the treasury, which had been depleted by the siege. Fortunately, victory provided new opportunities. Harold's defeat left a power vacuum in the Northern Territory. Selonian tribes fled, leaving behind fertile valleys, pastures, and shallow mines. I seized these lands and launched large-scale reclamation and grazing projects. I organized refugees to farm hardy crops like oats and rye to achieve food self-sufficiency. Simultaneously, I expanded the sheep industry, leveraging the vast pastures to produce high-quality wool. Edgar's team had already established a trade network in the Plantagenet Kingdom during the war. Conford wool was now being shipped south to textile hubs. Conford Victory wool gained a reputation for quality, capturing a significant market share. Massive orders from southern merchants provided vital cash flow. Predictably, local southern competitors attempted to sabotage Conford's trade through rumors and barriers. I instructed Richter to intervene in the commercial sphere. After a series of accidents involving warehouses and friendly reminders to competitors, the opposition quieted and trade flowed smoothly. To consolidate financial control, I mandated that large wool transactions be settled through the Conford Border Bank. Offering tax incentives for bank drafts increased the bank's capital and embedded Conford's financial influence into the trade chain. I noticed the widespread habit of smoking among the diverse population arriving in the north. Most used pipes, which were cumbersome and inconsistent in quality. I conceived the idea of the cigarette. By wrapping processed tobacco in thin paper, I could create a portable, easy-to-use, and standardized product. I identified potential regions in the south of the territory suitable for tobacco cultivation. Tobacco promised massive profits, potentially exceeding wool. I ordered Edgar to survey land and prepare for trial planting. I also tasked Hector's Ordnance Bureau with creating a special project team to refine tobacco processing and develop suitable rolling paper. The goal was simple: create a smoother, more attractive product than traditional pipe tobacco. After a grueling day of administrative tasks, I returned to the castle late at night, utterly exhausted. I enjoyed a relaxed dinner with Charlotte and Lady Isabella, briefly setting aside political burdens to play with Klein. After dinner, I cherished my daily ritual, bathing Klein with Charlotte. In the small tub, Klein splashed happily, reaching for his parents. Charlotte gently washed their son while I carefully supported him to ensure he stayed safe. In the warm, steamy air, they shared a silent, intimate moment. For me, this was the ultimate respite from my duties as lord, allowing me to simply be a husband and father. Once Klein was handed off to the nursemaids, I and Charlotte were finally alone. Charlotte hugged me from behind, sensing my fatigue. She whispered softly, "Sleep with me tonight." I finally returned to the master bedroom. Charlotte snuggled into my arms, resting her head on my chest. I held her close, my hand resting on her back. Her shoulder-length blonde hair shimmered in the dim light. I absent-mindedly twirled her hair, enjoying the silence. I longed for intimacy as a way to relieve my stress. They had only shared a bed once, a year ago. However, I was physically and mentally drained. Between the Solon army, internal threats, and post-war governance, my nerves were frayed. I feared I wouldn't be at my best. I wanted to give her my full attention rather than failing due to exhaustion. I decided to rest instead. The room was quiet, save for the crackling fireplace and their steady breathing. Charlotte didn't press for more, content just to hold me. Perhaps she sensed my exhaustion and simply valued the peace. This quiet intimacy was a precious gift to me. I felt no pressure, only the comfort of her presence. Charlotte soon drifted into a deep, rhythmic sleep. She was asleep. I watched her peaceful face in the dark. I felt a profound sense of satisfaction. Being trusted and needed by her was more restorative than anything else. I wished to freeze this moment, far from the world's troubles. As my thoughts drifted, my accumulated fatigue finally overwhelmed me. Wrapped in her presence, I fell asleep. Winter winds still swept the northern wasteland, but the air now carried the scent of thawing earth and new activity. A newly paved road snaked through the territory recently claimed by Conford. I stopped to inspect the construction, noting the deep foundations and reinforced drainage. The road was simple but sturdy, designed for heavy supply wagons and cavalry. New settlements were springing up along the route, populated by refugees employed through work-for-relief programs. I knew that handouts were only a temporary fix. Providing jobs stimulated the local economy and gave refugees a stake in the region's growth. These roads connected pastures, workshops, and docks, accelerating trade and military mobility. Every mile of road represented the growing power of Conford. Riding 10 miles further, I reached a bustling industrial site. Beside a thawing river stood a massive complex of stone and wood workshops, chimneys billowing smoke. This was the new wool textile hub, a cornerstone of the post-war recovery. The site employed thousands, over 1,500 of whom were women. This influx of female workers had sparked significant social change. With economic independence, women were marrying later, no longer reliant on early marriage for survival. The site's success had already begun to generate vibrant new business opportunities. The influx of thousands of workers, laborers, stevedores, and sailors has created massive daily consumption demands. With the population exceeding 20,000, Conford's state-run shops have established branches here, selling grain, oil, textiles, and cheap ornaments. Private vendors have gathered as well, forming a vibrant, emerging town. Reports from the Southwest Peninsula are promising. Thanks to Count Rockefeller's support and Edgar's management, thousands of war horses have been trained, bolstering Conford's cavalry. In a sheltered valley, I have initiated a trial plantation for tobacco seeds from afar, a future gold mine managed by experienced farmers. I visited the Ordnance Bureau, a hub of orderly, intense activity. Hector was absent, likely buried in a secret workshop with his dangerous ideas. Elmont, Hector's steady deputy, greeted me. Though usually composed, he was visibly excited. "My lord, we've created something new." Elmont led me to a secluded, walled testing ground. Assistants uncovered a bizarre, short-barreled weapon. It was a cannon with a comically short, thick barrel and a massive bore, resembling a giant iron mortar. I touched the cold, rough cast iron. "We call it a mortar," Elmont said proudly. "It fires heavy stone projectiles or explosive shells. With a range of 300 to 400 paces, it's devastating against fixed fortifications or dense formations." "Demonstrate it." "Yes." Gunners loaded a spherical granite projectile into the bore, aiming at the distant northern mountain wall. "Clear the area," Elmont ordered. After the fuse was lit, a thunderous roar erupted. The cannon recoiled violently, shaking the ground as fire and smoke spewed forth. The stone projectile arched through the sky like a meteor, whistling toward the cliff. Boom! The impact shattered the rock face, sending debris flying and triggering a small landslide. The power was terrifying. While lacking range and mobility, it is perfect for sieges or attacking dense enemy camps. Elmont smiled sheepishly. "Lord Hector, and I thought it should be named the Karl Mortar." I laughed, touched by their gesture of respect, and patted Elmont's shoulder. "Excellent. Optimize it for mass production." Conford's meritocratic system, managed by Edgar's Ministry of Organization, ensures Elmont's team will be rewarded, reflecting the territory's growing maturity. Leaving the bureau, I looked back at the land, now more vibrant than before the war. The biting northern wind felt warmer. Spring was coming. Conford has been tempered like steel, turning the scars of war into momentum. Meanwhile, the northern ice plains are still struggling in cold and decay. I would grant Harold and the Solonians no time to recover. It was time to strike. In the war room, Roland stood before a map, briefing the generals on the spring offensive. "Intelligence confirms that while we fought Harold last winter, the Valaya kingdom stabbed Solon in the back. Valaya seized 7 border fortresses and grasslands. Harold pushed them back, but Valaya holds key positions and has secretly requested an alliance to crush Solon. This is a strategic boon. The enemy's enemy is a useful pawn. Our direct opposition, Solon's elite corps, has dwindled to about 20,000. Even with total mobilization, Harold can only muster 50,000, mostly conscripted slaves and tribesmen with low morale and loyalty. The destruction of Luoyao and his musketeer guard has likely terrified other foreign mercenaries serving Solon. The situation is overwhelmingly in Conford's favor." I addressed the room. "Our goal for the spring offensive is not just territory, but forcing Harold into a continuous, exhausting mobilization. We must deplete his remaining elite troops, expand our influence, and shatter the enemy's will to fight. We will execute a 3-pronged strategy. East, Roland will feign an attack on Twin River City to distract Harold and force him to split his forces. North, light cavalry and dragoons will raid supply lines and disrupt spring farming. South, the main hammer will strike Golden City. We will burn the surrounding farmlands to starve the city and lure Harold into a decisive field battle. The South will be our main theater to crush Solon's 8 legions." Brendan detailed the southern deployment. Golden City is defended by 12,000 to 15,000 troops, including remnants of the sword and dog legions. We are committing our main force, the 1st Regiment, 2 elite battalions of the 2nd, 1 of the 3rd, 2 heavy cavalry battalions, Leon's Dragoons, and 3 elite grenadier companies. With 3,000 support troops, our 12,000-strong elite force will lure out and annihilate the Solon main army. I outlined the strategy. Roland will lead the 3rd Regiment, a cavalry battalion, and mercenaries to conduct diversionary attacks on Twin River City, while cavalry units handle harassment in the north. For the Valaya Kingdom, Klein and Werner's naval forces will transport 2 elite marine companies around the North Sea to land on the coast. We will supply them with muskets, ammunition, and grain to help them hold forts and pressure Solon, keeping Harold trapped in a 2-front war. The plan was clear and well-coordinated. Everyone turned to me for the final decision. I tapped the table. The key is attrition. It's not about how many Solonians we kill or forts we take, but disrupting their spring planting, draining their grain, and forcing them to conscript laborers, halting production. I leaned forward. Cranford has steady resources. Solon is already crippled from last year's defeat. If we press them steadily without overextending, a few more such campaigns will collapse their economy and incite internal chaos. Avoid recklessness. Commanders, stick to the objectives. Advance or retreat as needed to preserve strength and keep bleeding the enemy. Understood. Understood, the officers replied. After the meeting, I returned to the castle, satisfied to shift from defense to offense. Harold, it's my turn to hunt you. At dinner, I was distracted until Charlotte gently reminded me my soup was cooling. I smiled apologetically. Lady Isabella took Klein to bed, leaving me and Charlotte to share wine in the quiet before the storm. Perhaps due to the wine or the relief of a set strategy, a long-dormant flame within me began to stir. It had been nearly a year since Charlotte returned. They had shared a bed, but mostly for comfort, as I remained cautious of her feelings and burdened by external pressures. Today was different. The intense meeting had left me physically energized. I felt a surge of vitality. Watching Charlotte's graceful movements, my desire grew clear and intense. It was time. After bathing, I sat on the bed in my pajamas, the room lit only by a bedside lamp and the fireplace. I was unusually nervous, fidgeting and listening for any sound in the corridor. The wait felt endless. My heartbeat echoed in the quiet room. Memories of their intimacy flooded my mind, making my breath hitch with anticipation. It had been a year. I craved her warmth and acceptance. Charlotte seemed to be testing my patience, lingering after her bath. I paced the room, my eyes fixed on the door. Finally, I heard light footsteps and the handle turning. Click. Charlotte entered and locked the door behind her. She wore only a long, white linen robe, loosely tied. Her damp golden hair clung to her neck, droplets catching the dim light. The robe's neckline revealed her elegant collarbone. She walked barefoot across the rug like a spirit. The scent of soap and her own skin filled the room, intensifying my longing. I checked the door, then cornered her, gazing down at her. Her cheeks were flushed from the bath, her eyes bright and soft. She looked at me with a mix of understanding and shy amusement. "What's gotten into you?" she whispered, touching my chest. "You feel so full of energy." The spark ignited the dry grass. I didn't answer, instead gripping her waist. I could feel her warmth through the thin linen. "You're right," I said, pulling her close. "I am full of energy." I looked into her eyes. "Shall we try to give Klein a sibling?" Charlotte blushed deeply at the blunt suggestion. She didn't pull away. Instead, she offered a gentle, encouraging smile. She nodded, whispering, "Yes." I kissed her. Charlotte let out a soft sound, her fingers tangling in my hair as she responded with eager, if slightly rusty, passion. All my anxieties and longing dissolved into the kiss. They fell back onto the soft bed, their weight shifting together. In the movement, a hand brushed the bedside lamp, turning it off. Click. Darkness enveloped them, save for the faint, flickering glow of the fireplace embers. Deprived of sight, my other senses sharpened. The rustle of fabric became rhythmic and intoxicating. The world narrowed down to this room, this bed, and the two of them. Despite my intensity, my movements were slow and slightly clumsy. It had been over a year. Back then, I was just a struggling lord facing an invasion, my future uncertain. Charlotte had come to me then. Now, the old familiar rhythm felt like something I had to relearn. My heart hammered against my ribs, and my fingers trembled. Charlotte lay still in the dark, letting me lead. She watched quietly as I, usually decisive and ruthless, displayed a rare, nervous vulnerability solely for her. This contrast stirred a tender, sweet affection in her. My nervousness proved how deeply I cared. A year ago, my tenderness had been tinged with a desperate finality, as if I might not return. This time was different. My tension was clumsy and precious, like a repentant child seeking to regain trust. Charlotte smiled in the dark, knowing she would never forget this night. It wasn't about grand events, but the subtle details, my trembling fingertips, my uneven breath, and my reverent caution. Finally, all barriers dissolved, leaving only the sound of our breathing and heartbeats in the silence. The fireplace embers flickered, casting a faint, stubborn warmth against the encroaching darkness. Time lost all meaning. The world narrowed down to this bed and these two people. Outside, the stars were hidden by clouds, but within the room, the embers were their stars and their heartbeats their music. Eventually, they relaxed. The burdens and tension of the day seemed to vanish. Charlotte, her forehead damp with sweat and golden hair clinging to her skin, lacked the strength to move. She rested against my chest, finding peace in the steady, rhythmic thrum of my heart. I propped myself up, searching the darkness until I found her eyes. Charlotte was watching me, her gaze filled with intoxicating tenderness and contentment. Without a word, an invisible force drew them together again. After the kiss, I looked at her flat stomach and teased, "Will this result in another sibling for Klein?" Charlotte laughed, her voice languid and playful as she twirled my damp hair. "It's not that easy." "It was easy enough with Klein," I replied seriously. Blushing in the dark, she tapped my shoulder. "That was an accident. And the situation was different." "How so?" "Back then, I was about to leave. And we had just—" She buried her face in my neck, unable to finish. I understood. That previous intimacy had been marked by a desperate, apocalyptic finality, unlike the calm certainty of tonight. "Fair enough, an accident," I conceded, pulling her closer and inhaling her scent. After a while, Charlotte whispered, "Actually, if there were another, it wouldn't be so bad." I paused, sensing the heat rising in her ears despite the darkness. "I was just saying," she added quickly, sounding flustered. "Don't misunderstand." I smiled. "Understood. But I would be very happy if it happened." Charlotte remained silent, hiding her face against me. The embers died out, leaving only their peaceful, synchronized breathing in the room. By March, the northern frontier's winter finally began to wane as the sun melted the snow. Spring returned to the scarred land. For the Solon kingdom, battered at the Battle of Carnford, this spring brought mixed emotions. The thaw meant the start of the spring planting season. Despite heavy losses and food shortages from the failed southern campaign, a successful harvest of spring wheat could provide a vital reprieve. Spring planting was Solon's most critical and fragile hope. However, I had no intention of letting them recover. Scouts reported that my forces were mobilizing, aiming not just at walls, but at the vulnerable heart of the Solon kingdom. The Lord's Hall in Flossgard felt cold and empty. The commanders of the 8 legions were absent, deployed to defensive positions to counter my pressure. Only Harold and his brothers, Isgir and Sven, remained. Harold sat on his obsidian throne, looking aged and weary. The defeat at Carnford had severely damaged his authority and the stability of his rule. He had anticipated my retaliation. He had predicted an attack on the wealthy Golden City, a vital granary, and had reinforced it with his elite legions. As a vital granary and tax hub, the loss of the Golden City would be fatal to Solon. I had already reinforced its defenses, stationing elite legions like the Sword and Hound there. Yet, he was unsettled by the reports flooding in from the Twin Rivers City, the northern coast, and the northwest. My forces seemed to be everywhere, harassing landings by sea, cavalry raids in the north, and large-scale movements in the east, stretching Solon's thin defenses to the breaking point. "We know our resources and manpower are depleted," Harold said, his voice heavy with fatigue. "We must crush this spring offensive quickly and decisively." He stood before the map, pointing at key nodes like Golden City and Twin Rivers City. If I establish fortified positions here, they will be nearly impossible to dislodge, he warned. With my superior logistics, I will turn these areas into impenetrable fortresses, making the cost of retaking them 100-fold higher. He traced a path northward. Worse, if I establish forward bases now, my autumn offensive will launch from hundreds of miles closer. I would need fewer supplies and could strike deeper into our territory. It would be a catastrophe that could shake the very foundations of the kingdom. Harold sighed at the mountain of reports detailing failed spring plowing, soaring grain prices, and rising public unrest. Internal and external pressures were tightening like a vice. He turned to his brother, Asgir, responsible for military orders and reserves. Have the vanguard units heading to Twin Rivers City and the coast departed? Asgir bowed. Yes, Majesty. The cavalry and Rain legions are moving toward Twin Rivers, while elite scouts and veterans are deployed to the coast. Harold nodded, his gaze fixed on the southern map, as if tracking the approaching Carnford army. He said quietly but decisively, "Order the royal guard and direct legions to prepare. It is time to march south and settle things with me." As the royal orders spread, the machinery of war began to crush the Solan kingdom's fragile society. Spring plowing was halted again. Farmers were forced to abandon their tools, pick up rusted spears, and march south as militia under the lash of tribal leaders and nobles. Unlike previous looting raids, this mobilization was marked by oppressive silence, exhaustion, and fear. They knew they were facing the enemy that had just decimated the Solan main force at Carnford. With fields abandoned and families facing starvation, they had no choice but to obey the royal decree. The economic collapse was even more desperate than the war itself. To fund the war, the court and nobles imposed crushing taxes. Last year's disastrous defeat had already depleted livestock and supplies, leaving the kingdom in dire straits. Grain prices skyrocketed beyond reach. A bag of wheat cost multiples of its usual price, yet remained unavailable. Families sold everything of value, while the black market thrived at extortionate rates. Nobles began forcibly conscripting slaves to fill the ranks. These slaves, mostly descendants of captured Plantagenet borderers, suffered the most under the famine. With rations slashed and labor demands increased for military construction, mass deaths occurred due to hunger, cold, and poor sanitation. In towns like Flossgard, carts piled with slave corpses were hauled to mass graves every morning. Hundreds of bodies daily led to outbreaks of plague, deepening the panic. Amidst this misery, the Carnford army reached the border. The primary threat appeared in the south, where Carnford scouts emerged near the Grey Wolf territory. This region, a gateway to the Golden City, became the site of intense skirmishes between cavalry scouts. Reports indicated a well-equipped Carnford main force of 10,000 to 30,000 soldiers. Simultaneously, Werner's fleet appeared off the northwest coast, maintaining a constant threat. Solan was forced to spread its forces thin to guard the coast, while Carnford used small boats for lightning night raids. These hit-and-run attacks on outposts and supply depots kept the Solan defense in a state of constant, paralyzing alarm. In the east, Twin Rivers City reported sightings of thousands of Carnford troops. Harold analyzed the intelligence with the eye of a seasoned commander. He concluded that the eastern force was a feint designed to distract him. He ordered the Twin Rivers garrison to hold firm behind their walls and focused his main strength on the southern defense of the Golden City. In the west, Klein and Werner landed 1,000 elite Carnford troops at a Valaya port, bringing supplies and hundreds of flintlock muskets. King Edwin of Valaya, having seen Solan's ferocity even in defeat, remained cautious. He coveted lost territory but feared Solan's military power. Carnford's victory at Carnford gave Edwin the confidence to switch sides. He eagerly pledged 20,000 troops to join the alliance. Werner and Klein realized this army was mostly untrained peasants with poor equipment, far inferior to even Solan's auxiliary units. Werner did not expose this, nor did he expect much from them. Their mere presence pressured the western border, forcing Harold to divert troops and easing the burden on Carnford's main front. He used his elite troops as an execution squad to drive the Valaya forces, utilizing them for logistics and intimidation. Thus, in the muddy, thawing northern frontier, the war began. On March 7th, the southern mountain roads were a treacherous mix of melting snow and mud. A blue river of Carnford vanguard troops marched steadily toward the Golden City.